Chapter 631. Imperial Consort Chui could not be offended by the Qin family. Ning Wang was far away in Qing and Prefecture. He looked like an idle prince, but in reality, he could not be offended. Chen Chong glanced at Li Xian and did not speak. The glass statue was broken because of that woman. Countless people saw it with their own eyes. Whether it was His Majesty or Imperial Consort Chui, they would not easily let this matter go. He turned to look at the white-haired woman and asked with concern, "Miaoyu, are you okay?" "I'm fine." The white-haired woman's face was a little pale as she shook her head. At this time, countless people had gathered around. This is the Medicine Buddha statue just now. Amitabha, Medicine Buddha, please don't blame. Sinful, there was a group of monks standing by just now. At this time, looking at the fragments on the ground, their faces were full of sorrow and regret. That Buddha statue was Medicine Buddha, also known as Medicine Buddha. Medicine Buddha, was the leader of the Eastern world of clear glass. However, at this time, it had turned into glass fragments on the ground. Oh my God, did that Buddha statue just break? This is 20,000 taels of silver. Who broke it? Just now, they said that it was Imperial Consort Chui who wanted it. This is terrible. It seems to be third young miss of the Qin family. I just saw it, more and more people gathered around. When they saw the situation on the ground, they were all shocked. Their eyes looked at the woman called Su Su and third young miss of the Qin family. Not far away, there was finally some movement from within the tent. Imperial Consort Chui accompanied Emperor Jing and walked over from afar. Everyone hurriedly bowed and greeted, "Your Majesty, Imperial Consort Chui." No need to be so polite. Emperor Jing waved his hand. Before he could speak, Imperial Consort Chui had already seen the fragments on the ground. Her face instantly darkened. She said coldly, "Who broke the glass statue that I wanted?" Countless people sighed in their hearts. Imperial Consort Chui was really unlucky these days. A few days ago, someone had broken a precious jade bracelet. Today, the Buddha statue that she wanted worth 20,000 taels of silver was broken. If shattering could lead to peace, then Imperial Consort Chui would probably be safe for a long time. This subordinate deserves to die. The Imperial guards who were guarding this booth knelt down in unison, their faces pale and bloodless. Imperial Concubine Chui looked coldly at the guards and asked again, "Who broke my glass statue?" Jing Di looked at Li Yi strangely. If it was half a month ago, he might be furious when the glazed Buddha statue worth 20,000 taels of silver was broken. He would investigate the matter thoroughly and punish those who should be punished and compensate those who should be compensated. But now, he knew that this thing was not worth much at all, so he naturally did not feel much. Of course, he still felt his heart ache. After all, according to Changde, up until now, the National Treasury had already received 300,000 taels of silver. After today's stained glass appraisal conference, there would probably be at least 500,000 taels of silver. Unfortunately, today's profits were split 50-50, and he would only get half of it. The old emperor's gaze made Li Yi very unhappy. It was as if he was the one who broke the glass. Only an idiot would do such a thing. After all, among the 20,000 taels of silver, there was 10,000 taels of silver. Just this 10,000 taels of silver, and the old emperor was stingy enough to collect taxes. The imperial guard raised his head and said in a trembling voice, replying to Imperial Consort Chui, "This Buddha statue was accidentally broken by third young Miss Qin." A bunch of nonsense. Chen Chang's face darkened. He pointed at the young woman and said angrily, "If she did not bump into her from behind, would third young miss have fallen?" A middle-aged man walked out from behind the young woman and said calmly, "Do you mean that my daughter deliberately framed third young miss?" When they saw the middle-aged man, many people were stunned. The man who stood out was surnamed Shin. He was the rentier of the Secretariat and was responsible for drafting the most important edict. He was also responsible for the secretarial work of the Prime Minister's Council. Drafting edicts was a matter of great importance. It was equivalent to directly participating in the political and military affairs of the country. Thus, the position of rentier of the Secretariat was extremely important. Those who held this position were all learned scholars. Of course, none of this was important compared to his identity. Other than this identity, he was also the eldest son of Prime Minister Shin. In other words, that young woman was the legitimate daughter of the Shin family. This matter was also related to imperial consort Chui. Although the Qin family and the Chui family had some friction recently, the root cause was still the King of Shu's faction. Prime Minister Shin had never publicly supported any of the princes and had even rejected the King of Shu's recruitment many times. Duke Chen's household and Prime Minister Shin's household, there was going to be a big show to watch today. That is not what he meant. Chen Qing walked over and said, "Everything should wait for your majesty to investigate before making a decision." Capital Governor Dong Wenyun also walked out from the crowd and said, "Official Chen is right. Please make a decision, Your Majesty." The former magistrate of Qing and Prefecture, Capital Governor Dong Wenyun, had married the eldest daughter of the previous generation of the Shin family. It was not surprising for him to stand out and speak at this time. What exactly happened? How did this Buddha statue break? Emperor Jing looked at Dong Wenyun and said, "Wenyun, I will leave this matter to you to investigate." Your Majesty, Your Majesty." Dong Wenyun bowed slightly and turned back to look at the young woman. He asked, Su, tell me, what exactly happened just now?" The young woman said with a pale face, "Uncle, I am also not too sure. When I was walking over just now, it seemed like someone pushed me from behind. Then I bumped into her and the glass statue broke." "Then who was behind you just now?" Dong Wenyun raised his eyebrows and asked again. "I do not know." The young woman shook her head and said. A woman beside her said, Su, I saw it. Just now, there was only a master walking past you, but he did not touch you." "Master?" Dong Wenyun frowned and asked, "Which master?" "This one." Mingzu walked over from behind. With a wave of her hand, a human-shaped object was thrown over. She nodded at Li Yi and looked at the motionless monk on the ground. She asked, "This master, the appreciation meeting is not over yet. Why are you in a hurry to leave?" "Mingzu, this is." Emperor Jing looked at her and asked in confusion. Mingzu replied, "Father, when I came in just now, I happened to see this master sweep Miss Shin with his sleeve." "Sweeping someone and pushing them out?" A man beside her had a look of disbelief. Mingzu casually waved her sleeve and lightly brushed the man's shoulder. He couldn't help but take a few steps back with a horrified expression on his face. Seeing this scene, many people immediately thought of the scene where the princess and the people of the Qi kingdom had a duel and discreetly distanced themselves from her. Amitabha, the monk chanted the name of Buddha and said, "Your Highness's martial arts are excellent. I am ashamed of my inferiority. However, I do not know martial arts and do not have the strength of Your Highness. I also do not have the ability to push this lady out with a wave of my sleeve." Bang! Suddenly, the monk's expression changed, and he suddenly swung his kasaya to shatter a glass statue that was smashing towards his head. The fragments flew in all directions, and it was an extremely gorgeous scene that instantly caused countless people to stare blankly at it. It happened very suddenly. From the moment a glass statue smashed the monk's head to the moment the monk attacked, it only took a moment. It was so fast that no one could react. The hall was strangely quiet. At this moment, Li Yi clapped his hands and looked at the monk. He said apologetically, "Sorry, my hand accidentally slipped." "Master, what did you want to say just now? Please continue." Chapter 632. The hall continued to be quiet. The monk raised his head to look at Li Yi, sighed softly, and slowly lowered his head. Some of the more timid women had turned pale with fright when they saw that scene. That glass statue was more than a foot tall. Moreover, it had been smashed with such force. So, if it had fallen on the monk's head, then it would have been a bloodbath in the Chongyuan palace. Then they thought of something. Just now, the monk clearly said that he didn't know martial arts, but if he didn't know martial arts, how could he smash the glass statue with just his sleeves? The scene just now surprised them even more than Princess Royal Xiao Lu's move. However, how did County Uncle Li know that the monk knew martial arts? If he really didn't know, wouldn't he have smashed someone to death just now? Moreover, what he had just smashed was another glass statue. Amitba. Several monks who had already bought the glass statue looked at the debris on the ground and sighed. Their faces showed that they had nothing left to live for. The corner of Jing Di's mouth twitched, and his face showed a painful expression. This was another glass statue. After being smashed like that, at least 20,000 taels of silver disappeared. Qin Chong was stunned for a moment. He pointed at the monk on the ground and said angrily, "Old monk, you still say that you don't know martial arts. Take him." Jing Di waved his hand, and immediately 2 imperial guards came forward to seize the monk. Imperial concubine Chui's face turned cold. She looked at Li Yi and asked, "Who told you to smash that glass statue?" Only then did everyone react. The old monk's lie had been exposed, but wasn't the price he had to pay a little too high? A glass statue. If they remembered correctly, this glass statue was sold for nearly 30,000 taels of silver. In other words, with County Uncle Li smashing it, 30,000 taels of silver was gone. Even if the glass statue had nothing to do with them, they couldn't help but feel distressed at this moment. Before Li Yi could speak, the capital governor, Dong Wenyun, came out and said, "Your Majesty, in order to expose this monk's lie, County Uncle Li was anxious and smashed this glass statue. It's understandable, County Uncle Li's quick wit, this Shen admires." The man surnamed Shen said. "What Lord Dong said makes sense. County Uncle Li was just anxious. At the end of the day, the responsibility lies with the monk." If Dong Wenyun and Shen Xiu had stepped forward because County Uncle Li had helped Shen Su out of trouble, then Qin Qing's words had surprised everyone. Qin Qing, who represented the Qin clan, was actually publicly opposing the imperial consort. "Your Majesty, in my opinion, this monk is the culprit. These 2 Buddha statues should be put on his head." Another person walked out from the crowd and said with a smile. Seeing that even the head of the Wang family stood out, many people were shocked. Old General Shui's rough voice was heard after a while, "Your Majesty, it's better to ask this old monk what he's up to before punishing him for his crimes. It won't be too late to ask for compensation." Just as old General Shui finished his sentence, the Minister of War, Yan Bing, stepped forward. Minister of Revenue Qin Huan. Minister of Justice. Chancellor of the Supreme Court. Another veteran general, Imperial Consort Chui's expression was frighteningly gloomy. The officials who were on the King of Shu's side had their mouths wide open in shock. It was not surprising that the Shen family had stepped forward. It was also not surprising that the Minister of War, Yan Bing, had spoken up for him. The family of generals had been trying to protect him for a long time, but the Wang family of Luochuan, the Minister of Revenue and the officials related to them. Since when did they have such a close relationship with him? Everyone knew that County Uncle Li Yi of Chang and was not on good terms with the King of Shu. His relationship with the officials on the king's side was like fire and water. Everyone thought that he was relying on His Majesty's favor to maintain his current situation. The day he lost the favor, he would be doomed, but who would have thought that his influence in the imperial court would be so great? Didn't that mean that if he supported one of the princes, all the advantages that the King of Shu had would disappear with the support of these people behind him? His advantage would immediately become a disadvantage. For a moment, the old monk was ignored by everyone. Li Yi was also a little surprised. What was the Qin family doing? And the Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, had specially asked him to train a few talents that the Ministry of Revenue could use. Was he returning the favor this time? Li Xian had said that the Chancellor of the Supreme Court was one of his people. What was going on with the others? He was not familiar with them at all. Oh, yes, among the people who had sent gifts to his family a few days ago, there seemed to be some familiar faces. The surrounding people were still whispering. Emperor Jing looked to his side. Chang De nodded and stepped forward to ask, "Tell me, why did you do this?" The monk's expression was calm and he was silent. Why isn't the monk talking? It's tens of thousands of taels of silver. Can he afford it? I'm also curious. Does this monk have a grudge against the Qin family? While the crowd was whispering, Li Yi suddenly said, "Your Majesty, I seem to have seen this master and the princess say a few words." The first half of his sentence was very light, but he emphasized the word princess. What? Emperor Jing did not hear Li Yi's words clearly. He asked in confusion, "What did you just say?" Amitba. The old monk finally said, "I don't know Princess Hui at all." "I'm afraid you've made a mistake." Chang De glanced at Li Yi. Even with his great hearing, he did not hear what Li Yi had just said about the princess. He looked at him and asked, "Did you just say that the monk talked to Princess Hui?" "No." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I thought about it. I seem to have made a mistake just now." What did Supervisor Chang say about Princess Hui? The old monk looked up at him with an unbelievable expression in his eyes. Finally, he lowered his head. "County Magistrate Li, you're wise. I have nothing to say." After saying this, the old monk said no more. After a short period of silence, the crowd made way for them. Princess Hui stood at the end of the road with a pale face. "Empress, I'll leave this matter to you," Emperor Jing said lightly, glanced at Li Yi, and said, "Come with me." Watching Emperor Jing walk to the back hall, Li Yi shook his head and followed. "This time, the Qin family does not owe you." When he walked past Qin Chong, he glanced at Li Yi and said in a low voice. Li Yi turned to look at third Miss Chen and said, "Remember to ask the imperial physician to treat the wound again. Don't touch water these days." Watching his back disappear, several officials in the crowd gathered together with a slightly gloomy face. "I didn't expect that he would have such an influence in the court. If we let him continue to develop, there will be trouble in the future. Humph, it would be fine if he didn't have today. Making friends has violated His Majesty's taboo. Do you think he can continue to be favored by the emperor?" A person showed a sneer on his face. The rest of the people were stunned for a moment, and then a smile appeared on their faces. In the back hall, Emperor Jing sat on the main seat and looked at Li Yi with a painful expression. He said, "With this fall, the 20,000 taels of silver in the national treasury will be gone. Your Majesty, it's 10,000 taels." Li Yi reminded him, "Did you forget that there is still half of it?" Emperor Jing's face twitched and he changed the topic. "How did you know that the old monk knew martial arts?" "I didn't know." Emperor Jing was slightly stunned and asked, "Then you dared to smash it?" Li Yi looked at him and said, "Didn't your subject's hand slip? Besides, your subject has already apologized. One last question." Emperor Jing took a deep breath and asked, "How did you know it was Princess Hui?" Imperial concubine Chui was too scheming and would not do such a thing. To be able to set up such an idiotic trap on such an occasion, her intelligence must be very low. Princess Hui obviously agreed with this condition, and it was not the first time she had done such a thing. Chen Chong had broken Royal Prince Duanyang's ribs, so she had a motive for revenge. Of course, when he and the eldest princess came in, that Princess Hui actually looked at him coldly, which made him very uncomfortable. This was also one of the important reasons. In short, Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at Emperor Jing and said, I guessed. Chapter 633. The monk was taken away by the imperial guards and would probably not have a good ending. Consort Hui was taken away by the empress, and Consort Shui went with her. The glass shards on the ground were cleaned up, and the tense atmosphere in the hall was restored. People began to pay more attention to the glasswares. The nobles began to bid crazily for the few remaining pieces of glass, and the price soared. Some of the monks were full of smiles, and some were full of worry. 2 of the few glass statues had been smashed, and from today onwards, there would be a few more temples with glass statues. How were the other temples going to survive? How were they going to attract believers? How were they going to receive incense? The man surnamed Shen looked at Shen Su and said, Su Su, let's go over. Your mother and the aunt are over there. Shen Su nodded and said, Father, you go first. I'll be right there. After her father left, Shen Su turned around and looked at the person behind her. She bowed slightly and said, Thank you, Your Highness, for just now. Li Xian waved his hand and said, It's what I should do. Then, he asked with some doubt, You really don't know Shen Shu? That's my older brother. Shen Su nodded and turned to leave. I knew it. Li Xian's face showed a look of realization. Miao Yu, the imperial physician is here. Let's go over there. Chen Chong glanced at Li Xian and saw an imperial physician carrying a medical box rushing in from outside. He turned around and helped the third miss of the Qin family to the front. Li Yi walked out from the back of the hall with a gloomy expression. The old emperor's health was getting worse, to the point where he would gasp for breath after a few words. Coupled with his workaholic state, it was likely that he wouldn't last more than 2 or 3 years. The plan had to be made as soon as possible. After this big job, he could start to plan his retreat. By doing both at the same time, he would at least have one more choice. Everyone saw him walk out from the back of the hall with an ugly expression and different thoughts. Old General Shui walked over, patted him on the shoulder, and said, It's all right, it's just 20 or 30,000 taels of silver. Don't tell me that your family lacks this amount of money. Being reprimanded by His Majesty is already a light punishment. If it were me, I'd probably spank your butt until it's swollen. So much silver was thrown away so easily. That's right. Brat, you should be happy in secret. His Majesty has only reprimanded you. If it was someone else, I'm afraid that their head would have already fallen off. Old General Ma also walked over and said. Li Yi was startled and said, Generals, you have misunderstood. His Majesty did not reprimand me just now, the old emperor really did not reprimand him. The 2 of them had a detailed discussion about the distribution of the loot. In the end, Li Yi still did not manage to convince the old emperor not to collect taxes. He had already lost hundreds of thousands of taels of silver, and with the addition of the 30% tax, he would be able to scam another 10,000 taels of silver. If you say he did not reprimand him, then he did not reprimand him. The 2 old generals looked at each other and smiled. They understood that young people cared about their reputation. With His Majesty's stingy character, it would be strange if he did not reprimand him for wasting 20 or 30,000 taels of silver. The head of the Wang family walked past Li Yi. The 2 of them looked at each other for a moment, and both of them revealed a smile that only the other party could understand. Old General Shui touched his chin and asked doubtfully, You brat, when did you hook up with the Wang family? They are the god of wealth. Looks like His Majesty is starting to be dissatisfied with him. On the other side, in a corner, someone glanced over and said coldly. Another person replied, He has become arrogant because of the emperor's favor. He only has himself to blame for what has happened today. If that's the case, we can add fuel to the fire behind his back. When he really loses the emperor's favor. An inexplicable smile appeared on one of their faces. When that time comes, be it the imperial consort, the Chui family, or the Qin family, none of them will tolerate him. Li Yi found a random reason to brush off old General Shui. As he walked through the main hall, he paid a little attention to the money. This time around, there should be at least 300,000 taels of silver in his account. No wonder the old emperor's eyes were green when he looked at him. Fortunately, this was an emperor with integrity and a bottom line. If it was another incapable ruler, he might even kill and rob people of their wealth. When he walked out of the main hall, he saw Mingzu standing there alone. Hearing the voice behind her, Mingzu turned around and looked at him. Father didn't talk to you about the glass statue, right? Your Highness, you have to work hard. Li Yi walked over and patted her shoulder. He sighed and turned to leave. Looking at his back, Mingzu had a puzzled look on her face. Inside the main hall, the last glasswares had been bought by one of the nobles. At this point, all the glasswares had new owners. There were dozens of colored glazed wares, including Buddhist statues and Buddhist beads, which could only be used by the Buddhist sections. What the nobles could really get was less than half of it. Most people were just here to appreciate it and broaden their horizons. The monks did not return to the temple in satisfaction. Only a small number of temples got what they wanted. More monks began to worry about the incense offerings in the temples in the future. At this moment, the head of the Wang family walked out and said with a smile, "What a coincidence." A few days ago, the Wang family bought a batch of glasswares from a foreign merchant. I wanted to keep them, but seeing that His Majesty donated all the treasures in the palace for the sake of the country and the people, I felt deeply ashamed and decided to sell those glasswares. Half of the proceeds will be donated to the national treasury. I have already asked His Majesty. 3 days later, there will be a glass bazaar in Hibiscus Garden. At that time, I hope that everyone will do me the honor. When everyone heard this, they were all stunned. Although the foreign country was small and remote, it was rich in rare treasures. This was something that everyone knew. The Wang family bought a large batch of glass from the foreign merchant. It seemed that there was a lot of it. Just now, there were many people who were depressed because they did not buy any glasswares. At this moment, there was some hope in their hearts. If there was a large batch of glasswares, then wouldn't their chances of getting it be very high? May I ask Brother Wang, how many glasswares does the Wang family have? A middle-aged man stood up and asked. The head of the Wang family smiled and said, "It will definitely satisfy everyone present." This explained a lot. A monk asked, "May I ask if there are any glass Buddha statues?" That foreign country is far away overseas. It is a Buddhist country. The head of the Wang family only finished half of his sentence. The faces of countless monks were glowing. This sentence meant that there were not only Buddha statues, but there were a lot of them. All the merchants in the capital knew that the foreign merchants were their god of wealth. The things they brought were precious and not expensive. If they were sold, they could make a profit of 10 times or even dozens of times. It was a pity that foreign merchants were hard to come by. County Uncle Li met one and gave the princess a statue. The Wang family also met one, and it seemed that the harvest was even bigger. Although they had to donate half of it to the national treasury, they might still make a profit this time. These days, they were also looking for foreign merchants all over the capital. Why did such a good thing not fall on them? Of course, even if it fell on them, they would not be like the Wang family, throwing out hundreds of thousands of taels of silver just to please the emperor. No one knew when it started, but there was a wind of glass in the capital. In the brothels, in the streets, everyone was talking about it. It was said that the threshold of the Cold Mountain Temple had been trampled 3 times in a short period of time. A temple without a glass statue was a broken temple. It could not attract enough believers. A rich and powerful person without glasswares was not a rich and powerful person. If there were not a few glasswares in the house, would you dare to call yourself a rich and powerful person? Where was the power, and where was the nobility? Colored glaze represented status and luck. Everyone wanted to get their hands on it. Now, this opportunity had come. The head of the Wang family instantly became the focal point of the entire whole. The crowd surrounded him in layers and layers. At the catering bureau, the chef was about to cry. County Uncle Li, Lord Li, Director Li, these dates are ordered by Imperial Concubine Chui to make date cakes tomorrow. Then I'll leave half for you, Li Yi said after thinking for a while. The chef shook his head fiercely. 70%, no less. 60%. If not, I'll ask the eldest princess. Someone, weigh the dates for County Uncle Li. Chapter 634. When Li Yi got the news about Princess Hui and the monk, it was already the afternoon of the next day. Princess Hui was a princess after all. She had the support of the Chui family and noble consort Chui. In addition, the Qin family and the Shen family did not pursue the matter. Her final punishment was to be grounded for 2 months. She had to copy the women's scripture and women's commandments 50 times each. She was grounded in a certain palace. During these 2 months, no one was allowed to visit her. Of course, the 2 glass statues were ultimately still on the Hui King's head, and he was fined a total of 100,000 taels of silver without any mercy. Even for a king, this was not a small sum. The punishment for the monk was even more severe. In order to reduce the number of people killed, the old emperor was not willing to kill for the next 2 years. Usually, he would be released after a few hundred years in prison. Of course, during the period of prison, those who had money and those who had strength and power could save a few years of prison time. This was just a small accident and did not affect the overall situation. The Wang family's colored glaze bazaar would be held as scheduled in 2 days. The location would be in Lotus Garden. From today onwards, the news would spread throughout the entire capital. This time, there would be more dignitaries and monks. Even the wealthy merchants in the capital who were not of high status but had a lot of silver would be invited. With such a large scale and lineup, everyone couldn't help but wonder how much glass the Wang clan had bought from the foreign merchants. Why hadn't they heard anything about it before? The entire capital was searching for foreign merchants, but those people seemed to have suddenly disappeared without a trace. Everyone could only first set their sights on the Wang family's glaze bazaar in 2 days' time. Li Yi's gaze fell on Mississippi Liu. Out of money again. He almost jumped out of his chair and asked, "It's only been a few days. 4,000 taels of silver is gone. What did you use the money for?" Mississippi Liu hugged her sword and said, "You were the one who said I was recruiting soldiers. Did you really use it to recruit soldiers?" Li Yi was skeptical. "Money can make the world go round. This is what you said." Mississippi Liu looked at him and said, "Of course I need more money to recruit soldiers. How much do you need this time?" Li Yi thought for a while and asked. If it was used for serious matters, he would not be stingy. 3,000 taels. Li Yi thought about it and said, "I'll give you 100,000 taels." "How much?" Mississippi Liu put down her sword and looked at him. 100,000. Li Yi repeated. Money was made to be spent. If he left the money at home, he would have to take it out every once in a while. In any case, there would be a large sum of money coming in 2 days, so he might as well be generous all at once. Mississippi Liu looked wary and asked, "Did you do something behind my back?" Li Yi was startled for a moment, then he waved his hand and said, 3,000 taels, go to the accountant and get it yourself. Until now, Li Yi had no idea how bold Mississippi Liu was. Even if she was given 1,000,000 taels of silver, she could spend it all in a short time, let alone 100,000 taels of silver. However, at the moment, he did not know what kind of monster would be created in the future because of this 100,000 taels of silver, and a generous chief of Wulin, when Mississippi Lou was about to go to the accountant, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Just in time, the organization has a new task for you to complete." Golden Jade Pavilion was the largest jewelry shop in the Jing Kingdom, mainly selling jewelry and precious utensils. It had branches in all the states and capitals of the Jing Kingdom. Although it was not explicitly stated, everyone knew that the one who controlled Golden Jade Pavilion behind the scenes was the famous Chui family. The capital was the gathering place of the powerful officials and rich businessmen in the Jing Kingdom, so the Chui family attached great importance to this place. The shopkeeper of Golden Jade Pavilion in the capital was a core member of the Chui family who was good at business. A young man went around to the back room and said to a middle-aged man who was sitting there and sipping tea, "Third uncle, today someone came to ask if we have any colored glaze wares here. There are 2 pieces in the warehouse, and they offered a high price. Why don't we sell them? What do you know?" The middle-aged man put down his teacup and said, "His Majesty has just held a colored glaze appreciation conference, and the Wang family will also sell a lot of colored glaze. At that time, most people will have colored glaze in their hands. What will those who didn't get it think?" The young man asked doubtfully, "The rarer something is, the more expensive it is. At that time, won't the price of colored glaze drop? The rarer something is, the more expensive it is, but the supply of colored glaze cannot meet the demand. How can the price go down?" The middle-aged man smiled and said, "At that time, those people will only be more crazy." When the young man was about to ask, he suddenly frowned and turned around to have a look. There was a noise coming from the front hall. "Second uncle, I'll go to the front to have a look," the young man said and strode forward. "Get out of here, you beggars. Don't disturb the business of Golden Jade Pavilion." A shop assistant of Golden Jade Pavilion said impatiently, "If you don't get out of here, I won't be polite." In front of him stood a few strangely dressed, ragged people. "What's going on?" The young man walked out from the back and asked with a frown. Seeing the young man come out, the shop assistant immediately put on a flattering smile and said, "Young master, there are a few beggars. I'm going to drive them out. There are guests coming in. Go and do your work. I'll talk to them." Seeing someone coming in, the young man pointed at him and said, "Young master, these people." The shop assistant seemed to want to say something. "Go." The young man waved his hand and the shop assistant had to leave. The young man looked at those people and said, "You beggars, there's nothing here for you. Go quickly." The beggar in the front looked at him and seemed to be a little anxious. He said, %yen %yen at. The young man was stunned and asked, "What did you just say?" %yen %yen at. The expression on the man's face became more anxious. The young man finally realized something and a trace of anger appeared on his face. He said, "Bastard, how dare you tease me? Someone, drive them out." "Wait." A voice suddenly came from behind. The middle-aged man came forward and looked at those people suspiciously. He asked, "Are you from a foreign country?" Then he seemed to realize something and asked again, "Do any of you understand Chinese?" Behind them, a man with messy hair and a somewhat thin body walked out. His appearance was obviously different from ordinary people. He stuttered and said, I understand a little. Your words, are you from a foreign country?" The middle-aged man asked with a trace of joy on his face. "No." The man opposite him showed a proud expression and said, We are from the Great Britain and Northern Ireland Union, United Kingdom. The Unsetting Sun Empire." The middle-aged man's face was filled with excitement. He didn't care whether these people were from the Kingdom of Madness or the Kingdom of the Unsetting Sun. Just by looking at their appearance, their broken Mandarin, and the big boxes behind them, he knew that these people were probably foreign merchants. The foreign merchants that the entire capital was looking for. The middle-aged man suppressed the excitement in his heart and asked, "What are you doing here?" "We have a lot of glass. We want to sell it to you," the man said. He turned around and waved to the people behind him. Someone immediately opened the two big boxes. The middle-aged man took a look inside and his eyes immediately became a little dazed. In those boxes, the glassware looked like ordinary porcelain, piled up randomly. With a cursory glance, one could see that there were dozens of pieces in one box. Adding up the two boxes, he rushed up and closed the box. He turned back and said loudly to the shop assistants, "See the guests out and close the door. Jinyu Pavilion is closed today." Chapter 635. You said that when you came here, there were 50 people. You crossed the sea, experienced a lot of hardships along the way, encountered the wrath of the sea god, the turning of the earth dragon, and were almost robbed by bandits. Only the 5 of you survived. The man surnamed Shui frowned and asked. The man with messy hair had a sad look on his face. He nodded and said, "My companions are all dead. We are the only ones left. What foreign country is so far away that you have to drift on the sea for half a year?" The man surnamed Shui asked suspiciously, "What country did you just say you came from?" "Great Britain." The man looked sad and said, "Great Britain." He looked up at the sky and said, "Great Britain, #@yen%. The United Kingdom, the great rising sun city. All right. The man surnamed Shui waved his hand. He didn't care about the Great Britain Kingdom. He had just identified that the colored glass was real, which was enough for him. "Is this the only colored glass you have?" he asked with a smile on his face. The man from Great Britain said in a trembling voice, "It's broken, it's all broken, there are only 2 boxes left." No wonder these people looked so embarrassed. It was not easy for them to have these pieces of colored glass after such a rough experience. The man surnamed Shui showed a regretful expression on his face, but it soon disappeared. He looked at the man and said, 10,000 taels, I'll give you 10,000 taels. Leave these 2 boxes. 10,000 taels is enough for the 5 of you to live happily here for 10 years. What foreign merchants like to do the most was to use precious treasures to exchange for some cheap things. The man surnamed Shui secretly remembered the tongue-twisting country just now. This country must be rich in colored glaze. The Wang family's colored glaze might have been bought from the merchants of that country. 10,000 taels. The man opposite shook his head and took out a small Buddha statue from the box. He said, 10,000 taels, this is for you. I know that colored glass is very precious here. The man surnamed Shui was stunned for a moment, then his face sank. These foreign merchants actually knew the trade. Originally, he wanted to use 10,000 taels to send them away. If he sold these things, he would probably get 100 times the profit. With such a great contribution to the family, his status in the Chui family would rise. However, he didn't expect that these foreign merchants seemed to have already figured out the market of Liuli. It wasn't easy to deceive them. A smile appeared on his face again as he said, I don't know if you've heard of this saying, the rarer something is, the greater its value. If there are too many of these colored glazes, they will naturally become worthless. In that case, we'll take our leave. The man nodded, turned around, and said a few words to those people. At #yen%, and after they responded, they picked up the 2 boxes and prepared to leave. The smile on Mr. Chui's face froze. He cursed inwardly that these foreign merchants were so decisive. He hurriedly took 2 steps forward and said, Hold on, we can discuss the money. The foreign man said, We don't want money. If you don't want silver, then what do you want? Chui frowned slightly. The foreign man turned around and looked around the golden jade pavilion. Mr. Chui finally realized something, and his frown deepened. Please sit here for a while. Let me think about this matter for a moment. Soon, a smile appeared on his face as he said, "Chui Wu, serve tea to the guests." "Second uncle, we can't eat so much colored glaze." In the back hall, Mr. Chui sat on the main seat. The young man looked at him and said hesitantly, "Of course I know we can't eat it." Mr. Chui waved his hand. How could a branch of the Golden Jade Pavilion in the capital eat 1,000,000 taels of business? They couldn't come up with so much money in a short time. Those foreign merchants proposed to barter with the treasures of the Golden Jade Pavilion for the colored glaze. Their idea was ingenious. They probably wanted to return to their foreign countries and sell the jewelry and other things. It was said that these things were very popular in the foreign countries. "Second uncle, should we?" The young man pondered for a moment. He suddenly looked at him and made a gesture of slitting his neck. "Foreign people's lives are cheap, but now we are in the shop. It's not good to do it. I will hold them for a while. You go and arrange people. Once they go out of the city." Mr. Chui pondered for a moment and said in a low voice, "Second uncle, I understand." The young man's face lit up. He quickly walked out of the lobby and went out through the back door. A cold smile appeared on the face of the man surnamed Chui. It was just a few foreigners. If they died, then so be it. A case without a head or tail would not be investigated by the government. As long as it was not in front of the people of the capital, even if the investigation led to the Chui family, they could easily settle it. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the man surnamed Chui walked out with his signature smile on his face. "All right, we'll do as you say. However, before that, let's first estimate the value of these stones." An hour later, several people with disheveled hair and ragged clothes came out of the Golden Jade Pavilion in the capital. Each of them carried a bulging bag and soon disappeared in the crowd. Inside the Golden Jade Pavilion, several assistants looked at the shelves around them. Just now they were full of goods, but now they were empty. They looked at the dazzling colored glaze in the 2 boxes. It was hard to describe their feelings. After asking people to move the 2 boxes away, Mr. Chui came to the back hall and suddenly said, "Is it all arranged?" "It's all arranged. I sent 20 good men to follow them. As long as they go out of the capital, they will be killed immediately and our goods will be taken back." Mr. Chui nodded and sat back in the main seat. After taking a sip of tea, a strange smile appeared on his face. At the gate of the city, several men in ragged clothes like beggars and carrying a few big bags went out of the city. The man walking in front suddenly said, "Lao San, what's the matter with you? You almost exposed yourself just now." At this time, he spoke fluent Chinese, which was quite different from when he was in the Golden Jade Pavilion. The man who stuttered Chinese felt wronged and said, "Big brother, you really can't blame me. I don't know how the Alliance Master came up with such a strange name. It's too much of a mouthful." Another person waved his hand and said, all right, it's good that the mission is completed. Hurry up and report back. I plan to exchange the points I earned this time for swords. There's nothing to say about the swords made by Swordforge Manor, but the weapons they make have always been for their own use. Ever since they joined our Lu Alliance, they can finally use the best weapons. The last person weighed the bag in his hand and said, "Say, do you think someone will run away with these glaze? If they sell all of them, what weapon can't they buy?" The man who was called Big Brother smiled and said, "Don't you think there will be 2 groups of inspectorates following them along the way? Even if someone can bribe the inspectorates, I'm afraid they won't be able to spend it. Although the world is big, there are even more martial artists. Where can they escape to?" That's right, Big Brother is right. It's impossible to run away with glaze. It's only because we are in the capital that the Alliance Master trusts us. Everyone else is followed by the inspectorates. Who would dare to be greedy? What's more, silver is nothing. If the Alliance Master is willing to give us some pointers, we can easily get on the heavenly list. Isn't this much more important than those worldly possessions? All right, all right. The big brother stopped and said, put these things down first. Quickly take care of those guys behind us and report back. Chapter 636. Why aren't they moving? In the forest hundreds of feet behind them, someone whispered in a low voice. Ever since these foreign merchants left Golden Jade Pavilion, they were ordered to follow behind them. Foreigners were foreigners after all. They did not have the slightest vigilance. Carrying treasures worth hundreds of thousands of taels of silver, they swaggered on the road. All the way out of the city, the roads they took became more and more remote. They were simply thinking about the people following behind them. In the wilderness, there was no place more suitable for killing people, robbing treasures, and destroying corpses. Once they walked a bit further and reached an even more desolate place, they would be able to make their move. Suddenly, someone whispered, why aren't they moving? They put the things down. Not good, they seem to have found us. The leader was also stunned when he heard the words, but then he slapped a man's head and said, what are you panicking about? There are only 5 of them. Even if they find us, what can they do? Let's do it. 20 silhouettes dashed out of the forest and headed in the direction of the 5 people. One of the men carefully put aside the bag he was carrying and said, brothers, you take a break and leave these people to me. A man next to him gritted his teeth and said, don't do this. Second brother has just broken into the heaven list. Everyone treats me as a soft persimmon. I have been challenged 18 times in 3 days. It's really hard to calm down if I don't vent my anger. On the opposite side, the 20 people who took out black cloth to cover their faces were surprised to find that the 5 people not only didn't escape, but even 2 of them directly faced them. Kill. The leader whispered and unsheathed his long saber. After a quarter of an hour, the 20 people had bruised noses and swollen faces. Their clothes were taken off, leaving only a crotch cloth. They were tied to the tree with their hands behind their backs. Their faces were extremely pale, and their expressions were of horror and despair. Spare my life. They watched as the foreigners tore off their loincloths. They seemed to have thought of something, and their foreheads were drenched in sweat. You don't talk about morality. One of the foreign men looked at them and stammered a few words. He patted the long saber in his hand, which made everyone's heart tremble. Big brother, why didn't you just kill them just now? A slightly younger man quickly stepped forward from the forest and asked. The man shook his head and said, 20 lives, the government will definitely investigate to the end. If they find something, won't it cause trouble for the Alliance Master? Don't worry, after losing so much face, these people definitely won't make too much noise. They got lucky. The conversation died down, and the footsteps gradually faded away. After an unknown period of time, a voice came from another part of the forest. 2 figures walked into the forest. One could vaguely see that they were a man and a woman. San Lang, don't worry, there seemed to be the sound of clothes being taken off, followed by the woman's somewhat worried voice, San Lang, won't others see us here? I won't. The man's breathing was a little heavy. All right then, the woman said softly, and the rustling sound began to grow louder. Can the 2 of you wait for a moment? Suddenly, a voice came from behind them. The woman's face instantly turned pale. She turned her head to take a look, and in the next moment, a scream could be heard. You, don't run away. Come back. Please help us, we will repay you in the future. 20 servants of the Chui family were stripped naked and tied up in the forest outside the city. They were found by a woodcutter overnight. Li Yi rubbed the space between his eyebrows. He looked at the second young lady and asked, are the people you arranged reliable? Mississippi Lu waved a hand, and the servants of the Li family carried a few large boxes into the room and left respectfully. She waved a hand, and the lid of one of the boxes opened automatically. There were all kinds of pearls, gems, and jade inside, and the whole room was lit up. "All right, let's do it." Li slammed the table and said. In the meeting room of the Lu League. "Do you all remember your targets?" Lu Luo sat at the head of the table and said in a low voice. "Yes, Chuzhou City, Golden Jade Pavilion. Qing'an City, Golden Jade Pavilion. Qingzhou City, Golden Jade Pavilion." Not long after that, a dozen people walked out of the meeting room. Carriages drove out of the hall, and each carriage was followed by a dozen people. The carriages traveled in different directions and disappeared on the official road. Over the past 2 days, from the nobles to the ordinary people, the topic of discussion was still glass. The brothels always followed the trend of the masses, and the stories told in the brothels also kept up with the times. In the past few days, there were a few legends about glass. For example, in the Journey to the West, Monk Sha used to be the curtain-lifting general in the heavenly court, but he was banished from the heavenly court because he broke a glass lamp belonging to the Queen Mother of the West. Even in the heavenly palace, glass was very precious. Another example was that if you collected 7 glass balls of different colors, you could summon a dragon. Another legend was that glass was the leftover stone that Nuwa used to patch up the sky. It was said in the Buddhist scriptures that the medicine guru Buddha made a vow when he was practicing the bodhisattva path. He wished that his body would be as clear and pure as glass, and that he would use the power of the fire net to purify the suffering of all living beings. Of course, the nobles rarely went to the brothels to listen to such stories. What they cared about was the Wang family's glass bazaar tomorrow. In the main residence of the Chui family in Jing City, 20 people knelt on the ground with their heads lowered, and their faces were pale. The man with the surname Chui yelled, "20 of you can't beat 5 of them." The leader of the group didn't dare to say that the other party had only sent 2 people, so he lowered his head and said, "Second Lord, we didn't know that those foreign merchants were all powerful martial artists." The man with the surname Chui's face was dark. If the glass balls weren't real, they wouldn't have lost anything. "We've underestimated those foreign merchants." He looked at the group of people kneeling on the ground and said coldly, "Go and receive your punishment." In a manor outside the capital, 2 men in purple stood at the front, and behind them were 10 men in blue and yellow. They all knelt on the ground and said loudly, "Welcome, Your Highness." The middle-aged Taoist nun slowly floated down from the sky and walked into the yard. A man in purple tore off the red cloth covering something in the yard, pointed to a towering white jade statue below, and said, "Your Highness, this was carved by a skilled stonemason under my command. It took me 3 months to carve it. It will definitely." The middle-aged Taoist nun glanced at him and asked, "I heard that many temples in the capital have glass Buddha statues?" The man in purple was stunned and said, "Your Highness, it is true. I've also thought that if I can also make a glass statue for Your Highness, I'm afraid it will attract countless believers. But except for the glass guanyin statue that the Cold Mountain Temple got from foreign merchants, and the glass statue that the county count of Chang'an gave to the eldest princess, the others are all from the imperial palace, and we can't get in touch with them. I've also sent people to find foreign merchants, but so far they have found nothing. However, the Wang family of Luochuan is holding a glass bazaar in Hibiscus Garden tomorrow, and we will also participate. We will definitely find enough glass to make a statue for Your Highness." The county count of Chang'an. The Taoist nun frowned. "Yes, the county count of Chang'an, Li Yi." The man in purple nodded and said. Chapter 637. "There's no need for you to participate in tomorrow's glass bazaar," the nun said after a moment's thought. "Lady, why?" The purple-clothed man paused. Just as he was about to ask for more details, the nun waved him off. "The situation in the Qi kingdom has changed. The blue-clothed and purple-clothed emissaries will leave the capital with me. One blue-clothed emissary will stay behind to contact the believers in the capital. Time is of the essence, so make your preparations." We'll depart at noon tomorrow at the latest, the nun said calmly as she looked into the distance. Yes, lady. The purple-clothed man cupped his hands and bowed. I'll make the arrangements immediately. After slowly retreating from the courtyard, he walked up to the crowd still kneeling outside. Su Zheng. A blue-clothed man immediately stood up. What are your orders, purple-clothed emissaries? The purple-clothed man said in a low voice, the lady has ordered that the emissaries of the holy religion and above must leave the capital tomorrow. However, we cannot abandon the believers in the capital. Among the emissaries, you are the most familiar with the capital. You will stay behind to contact and develop the believers. Do you have any objections? The blue-clothed man cupped his hands. I'll follow the lady's orders. He then raised his head. What about the lady's other avatar? The purple-clothed man frowned. From now on, you will be in charge of all matters concerning the holy religion in the capital. You may act as you see fit. Yes, lady. The blue-clothed man said loudly. The blue-clothed men behind him all looked envious. The young man was the youngest blue-clothed emissary of the holy religion. Because of his outstanding abilities, he had risen from a common believer to a blue-clothed emissary in less than a year. If he were to advance one step further, he would become a purple-clothed emissary, second only to the lady and the protectors. Now that the believers in the capital were handed over to him, it was only a matter of time before he became a purple-clothed emissary. Li Yi. Within the courtyard, the middle-aged nun looked in a certain direction and slowly recited the name. The Wang clan was going to hold a glass auction soon. This was a business that involved at least 1,000,000 taels of silver. Perhaps it was because he had seen too much silver and treasures in the past few days, but at this moment, Li Yi actually calmed down. Duan Wu and Li Yingkai were playing marbles in the courtyard. The two of them didn't have much fun for many days. The old granny was going to send this brat to a math college. After a while, Duan Wu would also have to go to the Princess Royal Highness's female college. The two elders were talking to Rui in the room. Li Yi had accidentally walked in and was thrown out. He turned around and glanced at them. He was really worried that the two elders would bring up a sensitive topic. He had been having a headache over this matter for the past few days. Looking up at the sky, he estimated that it was about time. After all, he still had to make a trip to Hibiscus Garden today. Walking out of the door, he saw Fong squatting under a tree, looking up at the sky. Let's go. Li Yi glanced at him and got into the carriage. Inside the room, old madam of the Li family pulled Rui's hand and asked anxiously, "Do you like to eat sour food these days?" Rui nodded and said, "A little. Tell me, did your period come last month?" Although old madam he was blind, at this moment, her lifeless eyes seemed to be glowing. She hurriedly leaned over and asked in a low voice. Rui blushed and said, last month, not last month." Old Madame Li's face immediately revealed an ecstatic expression. She said, quick, go find a doctor. You two are so old, why don't you know anything?" Looking at old Madame Li who hurriedly went out to make arrangements, Rui opened her mouth, but in the end, she didn't say anything. It was just a habitual discomfort. Even a grandmaster couldn't avoid these matters with women. Sometimes, she even wished that she wasn't a grandmaster. Now that the Li family was considered influential, they naturally had to find the best doctor. After an hour, a famous doctor in the capital was helped out of the carriage. He was dizzy from the jolting along the way and first held onto a tree outside to regain his composure. Before he could regain his composure, he was dragged into the mansion by a man. The man's surname Su said impatiently, "If you want to vomit, you can vomit later. Let's get down to business first." The doctor had a helpless expression on his face, but he also knew that he couldn't afford to offend this family, so he was dragged in by the man. Not long after, the doctor withdrew his hand from the woman's wrist. "How is it? Are you pregnant?" Old Madame Li asked impatiently. Although the woman didn't say anything, there was a look of anticipation on her face. Pregnant? The doctor looked at old Madame Li in confusion and shook his head. I haven't felt the pulse of pregnancy. Young madam, you've been worrying too much lately and have been depressed. Wait for me to write you a prescription. You'll recover after a period of time. Old Madame Li was startled for a moment before a trace of disappointment appeared on her face. She immediately smiled and said, Then I'll have to trouble you, doctor. She turned to look at Rui and held her hand. It's all right. You're still young. There will be plenty of opportunities in the future. Rui nodded and smiled faintly. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the doctor handed the prescription to old Madame Li. Before he left, he turned back and said, Mental illness requires mental medicine. Pills can only be used as a supplement. Young madam, you should let go of the knot in your heart as soon as possible. When he finished speaking and turned around, a carriage came from the side and slowly stopped in front of the Li mansion. A white-haired old man carrying a medicine box got out of the carriage. When he raised his head and saw the people at the gate, he was slightly stunned. Rui looked at the old man and walked up to him, saying, Dr. Liu, my husband just went out. I'm afraid he won't be back until very late. Liu Jimin shook his head and said, I'm not here to see County Uncle Li. 2 days ago, County Uncle Li said that Madame Li wasn't feeling well and asked me to come and see her. It's just that I've been delayed by something these past 2 days. Rui smiled and said, If that's the case, Dr. Liu, come in and have a seat. She only vaguely knew that this Dr. Liu seemed to be an imperial physician in the palace and had a close relationship with her husband. Even if she didn't need him to treat her, she couldn't neglect him. At this moment, old Madame Li was disappointed and didn't have much interest in this Dr. Liu. As for the doctor just now, he looked at Liu Jimin with slight dissatisfaction. After thinking for a moment, he actually went in again. Xiao Huan, go make a cup of tea for Dr. Liu. After entering the hall, Rui first ordered Xiao Huan. Yes, Mississippi, the servant girl immediately trotted away. After Liu Jimin sat down, he directly looked at Rui and said, I don't know if Madame Li can let me take your pulse first. Rui smiled and said, My body has been much better these past 2 days. There's no need to bother Dr. Liu. She really didn't want to hear the same words a second time. Old Madame Li came over and said, Your health is more important. Let Dr. Liu take another look. She was frightened when she heard the words heart disease and heart medicine just now. It's not a bad thing to have another doctor take a look. Moreover, in her eyes, the doctor who came later had a fluttering white beard and a sage-like appearance. He seemed to be more reliable than the previous doctor. As for the doctor standing on the side, he just glanced at Liu Jimin with contempt and didn't say anything. Since he had already been invited, there was no need to invite another doctor. Didn't inviting another doctor mean that they didn't trust him? He wanted to see how good the medical skills of the old man opposite him were. Old Madame Li's words couldn't be disobeyed. Rui thought about it and sat down on the other side. She stretched out her wrist and said, Then I'll have to trouble Dr. Liu. Liu Jimin smiled and placed one hand on her wrist. He slowly closed his eyes. Playing tricks. Seeing the old man's method of taking a pulse, the doctor's expression changed at first, but then he revealed a sneer and his face was full of mockery. It was unknown if anyone in the world knew how to use such a legendary technique. An old man who came out of nowhere was probably just bluffing people. Liu Jimin frowned, but he quickly relaxed. He opened his eyes and withdrew his hand. He stood up from the chair and said with a smile, Congratulations, Madame Li. Rui was stunned for a moment, and a puzzled expression appeared on her face. Old Madame Li was stunned for a moment. She seemed to have thought of something and suddenly got up. She quickly walked over and asked in disbelief, Dr. Liu, you mean, Madame Li is pregnant? Liu Jimin said with a smile. You old man, you're talking nonsense. The doctor finally couldn't stand it anymore. He walked out from the side and said coldly, I clearly didn't feel the pulse of pregnancy just now. You quack, how dare you talk nonsense? The doctor looked at Lu Jimin and said loudly, tell me your name. I'll expose you to the government. I won't let you continue to swindle people. Madam Li is pregnant not long ago. A quack really can't feel the pulse of pregnancy. Lu Jimin glanced at him and said, as for my name, I'm Lu Jimin. Lu Jimin, right? I'll remember you. I'll go to the government today. The doctor said a few words and suddenly seemed to think of something. He murmured, Lu Jimin, Lu. He suddenly felt his legs go weak. His face showed a frightened expression. He stood unsteadily and fell on a chair. You are Lord Lu. At this time, Xiaohuan came in from outside with tea and said, Miss, there's a monk outside looking for you. Chapter 638. The old lady looked at Lu Jimin anxiously and asked, is this true? Is Rui really pregnant? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? The doctor suddenly jumped up from his chair and looked at the old lady with dissatisfaction. What do you mean by this? Do you know who is standing in front of you? This is the imperial physician of this dynasty. Lord Lu's medical skills are unpredictable and unparalleled. If he says it's a pregnancy, it's a pregnancy. It can't be wrong, shut up. Lu Jimin glared at him. Even he didn't dare to talk to the old lady of the Li family like this. If Uncle Li heard this, what would he think of him? Lord Lu, do you want to take a closer look? The old lady was still a little uneasy and asked anxiously. Lu Jimin smiled and said, don't worry, old lady. Madam Li is pregnant not long ago. It's normal that ordinary doctors can't see it. Even I almost couldn't see it just now. Miss is pregnant. Xiaohuan put the tea on the table and hurried over. She looked at Rui's belly with her mouth wide open and asked with surprise and joy. Ba. I wonder if Uncle Li is here. My master has something for you. A voice came from outside the door. The old lady turned around and looked at the young monk. She said in surprise, it's Master Mingjing. Is Master Tan Yin here? Master Tan Yin had a high status in the hearts of Buddhist believers in the capital. The old lady couldn't neglect him and hurried forward to ask. The young monk shook his head and said, Master is meditating in the temple. He asked me to bring 2 scriptures and a prescription for Uncle Li. The little monk took out a cloth bag from his bosom and handed it over respectfully. Prescription. Lu Jimin came over and glanced at the prescription on the 2 scriptures. He said with a smile, Master Tan Yin's medical skills are indeed worthy of his reputation. This prescription is used to regulate and stabilize the fetus. It seems that the master has already seen that Madam Li is pregnant. You don't worry now, do you? Don't worry. All the wrinkles on Madame Dowager's face smoothed out. She looked at the young monk and said, Little Master Mingjing, please go back and thank Master Tan Yin for us. I will go up the mountain to fulfill my vow another day and offer enough incense for Cold Mountain Temple. When he turned back to look at Rui, his expression immediately changed. He walked over to help her and said, Why are you still standing here? Hurry up and sit down. Old madam, Rui had just opened her mouth to speak when she was rudely interrupted. What about me? This is a serious matter. You youngsters won't understand. The old madam waved her hand and said, In the future, you will stay at home and not go anywhere. You are not allowed to do anything. You are not allowed to do chores like washing and cooking. Leave it all to the servants in the manor. Which rich family in the capital would spoil their servants like you do? Madame Dowager turned around and said to the 2 maidservants outside the door with a sullen face, Did you hear that? If I see that you don't serve young madam well in the future, I'll kick you out of the house. Got it. The two maidservants hurriedly replied. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, this news had spread throughout the Lee manor. Housekeeper Lee, who had always been harsh, was rarely generous. The maidservants and servants all received a lot of money. Even the horses in the stables were fed 2 handfuls of fresh grass. When Lu Jimin came, he only carried a small medicine box. When he left, even the carriage was stuffed full of gifts. The young monk was carrying a large pile of boxes. Even his head could not be seen. Sigh, the doctor from the capital walked out of the Lee family's gate and put away a copper coin threaded with a red thread. He sighed with a face full of regret. Hello, second young mistress. Mississippi Lu walked through the gate and happened to see a man riding a horse straight out of the manor. She frowned. When she walked through the gate, she saw the joyful expressions on the faces of the maidservants in the manor. She was slightly startled. In Hibiscus Garden, it was a rare occasion of the year. This glazed Buddha statue, the starting price is 8,000 taels. 10,000 taels, 11,000 taels. 12,000 taels. The monks did not reject anyone who came to the Buddha statue. It was not just the capital. 3 days was enough for the monks from the neighboring prefectures to rush over upon hearing the news. In fact, ever since the old emperor invited many senior monks to appraise the Buddha statue, many monks from other places had rushed over. Although they had missed the stained glaze appraisal conference, they had made it to the Wang family's charity sale. The monks were extremely generous. They did not hesitate to shout out 10,000 taels of silver. This also made the nobles in the capital realize who were the truly rich. At the very least, they would hesitate to take out so much money at once. For those who did not have much money, it was no different from digging out their hearts. Fortunately, the Wang family did not stand on ceremony with the monks. However, the prices of the other glazed wares and jewelry were much cheaper than those in the palace. However, when one thought about the large amount of glaze they had obtained from foreign merchants, it was not surprising that the prices were a little lower. Of course, some of the small incidents that happened would occasionally surprise the crowd. For example, the Wang family directly offered 50,000 taels of silver for a glazed statue that resembled the living old master of the Chui family, which was almost 5 times the price of a Buddha statue of the same size. The Chui family almost flipped the table on the spot, but in the end, they had to swallow their anger and buy it. If the old master's glazed statue were to be bought by someone else, the Chui family would lose face. It was not something that could be bought back with 50,000 taels of silver. When Fong walked out of Hibiscus Garden, he was still rubbing his hands. Li Yi could even feel his whole body trembling. Come to think of it, this was like a penniless pauper suddenly mastering the godly skill of turning stone into gold. The fact that he could still stand there so steadily showed that his mental fortitude was not bad. To a certain extent, this was even better than turning stone into gold. After all, glaze was more expensive than gold. In fact, Li Yi did not understand Fong's behavior. With Fong's current wealth, buying a big house was not a problem at all. If he could get past Madame Fong, a beautiful concubine could enter the house at any time. However, although he had money, he had never spent it. The money for Zhuzi's marriage should have been enough a year ago, right? Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that he was the same. The money that he had worked so hard to earn was all squandered by Mississippi Lu before he could spend it. What's wrong? The carriage suddenly stopped. Li Yi remembered that he had just left Hibiscus Garden not long ago. There was no reason for him to be home now, so he lifted the curtain and asked. Young master, do you want to go in and have a look? Fong's face showed a hesitant expression, and he pointed to the alley beside him and said. I'm not going today, Li Yi said as he lowered the curtain after taking a look. Okay. Fong nodded, got off the carriage, and lifted the curtain. Li Yi jumped off the carriage and walked to the alley. Li, Miss is not home today. Xiao Chui opened the door and shook her head. Not home. Where did she go? Li Yi looked at her and asked. She just went to the shop. Miss may come back with Sister Ruoqing in the evening. Xiao Chui looked at him and said, Li, do you want to come in and wait for a while? No need. Li Yi shook his head and said, I'll go first. Xiao Chui stood at the door and watched her walk away before closing the door. She walked to the yard and asked, Miss, why did you lie to Li and say that you were not home? Xing Zumo shook her head and did not speak. There was another knock on the door. It must be Li coming back again. Xiao Chui asked as she walked, Miss, what should I say this time? She opened the door a crack, poked her head out, and said, Li, Miss said she is not home. She was startled and looked at the stranger in front of her. She asked in confusion, May I ask who you are looking for? Hearing footsteps that were different from Xiao Chui's, Xing Zumo took a deep breath and was about to speak when she saw the person standing in the yard. After a moment of shock, her face immediately turned pale. The middle-aged man sighed and said, Zumo, you have been in the capital for so long. Why haven't you gone back to see? Chapter 639. Home. Xing Zumo gave a self-deprecating smile. 13 years ago, I had no home. Do you still remember what happened 13 years ago? I don't dare to forget, Xing Zumo shook her head. When she looked up at the middle-aged man again, her expression had returned to calmness. She said, What brings you here today, Assistant Minister Xing? Feeling the alienation in her words, the middle-aged man sighed and said, I was just a small official in the Ministry of Revenue. I couldn't change the overall situation and could only watch my brother fall into trouble. Later, I also went to the musical house to find you. At that time, I learned that you had been ransomed with a large sum of money. All these years, I have never given up looking for you. The middle-aged man looked at her and said slowly, That day, Zijian said that the person he saw in the Drunken Moon Tower seemed to be you. Only then did I know that you had come to the capital. These days, I have been afraid to see you because I am worried that you still can't forget what happened in the past. What else can I do for you, Assistant Minister? The middle-aged man looked at her and said seriously, Come back. The Xing family is no longer the Xing family 13 years ago. I promise that from now on, no one will bully you. You are still the young lady of the Xing family. I want to make it up to you all these years. The Xing family is indeed no longer the Xing family 13 years ago, and I am not the young lady of the Xing family 13 years ago. Xing Zumo looked calm. She shook her head and said, If there is nothing else, Assistant Minister Xing, please go back. Zumo, a trace of pain appeared on the middle-aged man's face. He said, Until now, you still refuse to call me second uncle. Xiaozue, see the guest out. Xing Zumo stood up and walked toward the inner yard. The moment she turned around, 2 lines of tears fell silently from her pretty face. I will come again. The middle-aged man sighed and looked up at her. There is one thing I need to remind you of. Stay away from that Earl of Chang, and the farther the better. Xing Zumo's footsteps paused, and then she sped up and disappeared behind the moon gate. Please go back. Xiaozue stood behind her, glanced at the middle-aged man, and said politely, Father, how is it? The young man was waiting at the door. Seeing the middle-aged man come out, he immediately stepped forward and asked, Let's talk when we get back. The middle-aged man raised his head and glanced at the tea house opposite him. There were already several people walking over here. He withdrew his gaze and walked towards the entrance of the alley. Not long after, an angry and embarrassed voice came from the carriage. What? She actually refused. Does she think she is, Pa? The middle-aged man slapped the young man's face and said coldly, "Shut up. If it wasn't for your uncle protecting us and taking all the blame, do you think you would still be sitting in the carriage today?" The middle-aged man glanced at him and said, "We owe her too much. Drunken Mo is my eldest brother's only flesh and blood. Fortunately, we found her. Otherwise, my conscience would never be at ease. No matter what grudges you have between the two of you, from today onwards, everything will be written off." "I understand, father." The young man covered his face and nodded. But when he occasionally turned his head, his eyes were filled with disdain and resentment. What debt? What flesh and blood? One made him suffer for several months, and the other ruined his future, becoming the laughingstock of the capital. From then on, he could only live at home and wait for death. Even if the king of Shu ascended to the throne in the future, there would be an indelible stain on him. The hatred was as deep as the sea. How could it be written off? The carriage stopped in front of the mansion. When the middle-aged man got off the carriage, the gatekeeper came forward to report, "Master, several lords have been waiting in the mansion for a long time. The palace seems to have sent someone over." The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment before he quickly stepped into the mansion. "Lord Tseng, you're finally back. We've been waiting for a long time." As soon as he stepped into the hall, several people stood up from their chairs and came forward to greet him. Sorry. I just went out to deal with some matters. I wonder what's the matter with your sudden visit." The few of them did not speak. Instead, they turned their heads and looked at a eunuch sitting in the main seat. "Does the imperial concubine have any orders?" Tseng Shichen's heart stirred. He immediately stepped forward and asked. The eunuch's voice was feminine and harsh. "The imperial concubine wants me to ask you. What kind of climate do you plan to see Li form in the imperial court?" The expressions of the few people changed when they heard this. "You're on your own." The eunuch only said a few words before he floated away, leaving the few people in the room looking at each other. One of them sighed and said, "It seems that the imperial concubine is still dissatisfied after the incident in Chongyuan Palace." Another person nodded and said, "The imperial concubine's worries are not unreasonable. Who would have thought that a small character who could be easily crushed would grow to such an extent? Now, he is no longer relying on the protection of His Majesty. But it's not so easy to touch him now. Not only do we have to face His Majesty, but we also have to face half of the imperial court." Someone said worriedly. The current Li, the Earl of Chang'an, was no longer the inexperienced and insignificant person that he was a year ago. If one counted carefully, how many things had he done, directly or indirectly, and how much support had he received from the courtiers over the past year? He was not a person of the officialdom. They were powerless against such a person a year ago. So, what could they do after a year? If they really had to face it head-on, some of them might even be smashed to pieces. This matter can't be rushed. We need to think about it at length. Tseng Shichen thought for a moment and said, "I think the others have also received the imperial concubine's instructions. Let's act according to the circumstances." Everyone nodded when they heard this. This time, the imperial concubine should be serious. That county early would probably have a hard time in the future. Bah. Li waved his sleeves to sweep away the dust on the road. He looked at old Sue and said discontentedly, "What's the matter that makes you so anxious? Is it because your wife is pregnant?" "No." Old Sue jumped off the horse and said excitedly, "Sir, it's the first Mississippi. The first Miss is pregnant." "What?" Li's body shook, and his eyes widened. He grabbed his arm and asked, "What did you say?" "The first Miss is pregnant." Old Sue panted heavily and said, "Just now, an imperial physician surnamed Lu went to our house. After feeling the pulse, he said that the first Miss is pregnant." Also, a monk sent a prescription to prevent the miscarriage. Young master, you should go back quickly. Stop talking. The young master has already left. Fong patted him on the shoulder and said, pointing to the horse that was galloping away. Hurry up. He waved the reins, and the carriage started slowly. Ah, young master, this time, we must hold a banquet for 3 days. When the young master is born, we will hold a banquet for him for a month. Fong got off the carriage and rushed into the mansion. He stepped into the yard and said with a smile. The Fong family sister-in-law came out of the room. She glanced at him and said, "Keep your voice down. Don't disturb the first Mississippi." Then she asked discontentedly, "Where is the young master? Why didn't he come back with you?" "What's more important than this?" Fong was stunned for a moment and said, "Didn't the young master come back on horseback long ago?" "No." The Fong family sister-in-law looked confused. A Taoist nun in a loose Taoist robe led a horse and walked on a path in the forest. Li Yi sat on the horse and looked at the Taoist nun. He asked, "Senior, where are you taking me?" Chapter 640. The Qi Kingdom. The middle-aged Taoist nun didn't look back and said lightly, "The Qi Kingdom." Li Yi's face changed. The place he wanted to go most now was his home, and the person he wanted to see the most was Rui, not the Qi Kingdom. He didn't want to talk nonsense with this Taoist nun here. Rui was pregnant. They were going to have a child. Rui would no longer have a knot in her heart because of this matter. This was the happiest thing that had happened to her since she came to this world. F*ck those Taoist nuns, and F*ck the state of Qi. If she hadn't hit his acupoints, and if this Taoist nun hadn't been a master, he would have rushed back now. "Put me down. I want to go home." Li Yi looked at her and said, "What do you want?" "I'll give you whatever I can." "As for silver, how much do you want?" The Taoist nun kept walking and asked indifferently, "The colored glass that appeared in the capital recently was all made by you, right? You want colored glass?" Li Yi was stunned and said, "You should have told me earlier that you wanted colored glass. Let me go back, and I'll tell you how to make colored glass. You can sell it in the Qi Kingdom or the Zhao Kingdom. If you don't believe me, you can go back with me." The colored glass was about to become worthless glass. Even if this Taoist nun knew how to make it, it would be useless. Besides, once they got home, it was uncertain who would rob who. The Taoist nun looked back and said, "If I were you." Li Yi suddenly felt a strange cold wind blowing around him. "So, you won't let me go back, no matter what? You have to go with me." The Taoist nun looked at him and said, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you. I'll let you go in 1 or 2 years, or at most 3 or 5 years. At that time, as long as you want, you can not only enjoy endless glory and wealth, but also be above tens of thousands of people. Forget about this kind of low-level MLM brainwashing." Li Yi lowered his head and cursed, "F*ck. What did you say? Must you go?" "I have to go. Can I write a letter and send it back?" 3 days later. There's news from the Skynet. Sir and a Taoist nun were seen outside the capital today. At that time, Master was riding on a horse, and the two of them were heading west. We've also found out the identity of the Taoist nun. She's the leader of a cult and is known as the Empress of Heaven. She once participated in the Hero Assembly. Strength assessment, Master. At present, we can only confirm that they should have gone west. Their exact whereabouts are unknown. Lu Luo spoke quickly. After carefully sorting out the information he had just received from Skynet, he immediately sent it back. "It's her. Why did she kidnap you?" Rui frowned. "I'll go after them immediately." "Where are you going?" Madame Dowager grabbed her and said, "You're pregnant, and you're a woman. Where can you go? I'll immediately send someone to the palace to report this matter to His Majesty. His Majesty will definitely send someone to investigate. It's useless. Rui shook her head. How could Madame Dowager know how terrifying the Taoist nun was? Madame Dowager shook her head repeatedly and said, no, absolutely not. If anything happens to you, how can I explain it to when he returns? It's all my fault. It's all my fault. Fong squatted on the ground and grabbed his hair. His eyes were bloodshot. Rui glanced at him and shook her head. Uncle Fong, don't be like this. The Taoist nun has the strength of a master. All the guards combined are no match for her. Don't worry. That boy is very clever. Little you stay at home and take care of yourself. I'll go there myself. A voice came from behind. Second granduncle walked in leisurely with his hands behind his back. Where are you going? Madame Dowager asked in confusion. Mississippi Lou shook her head and said, no, I can't fight with others in the future. If second granduncle leaves, what will happen to the family? The old man frowned and said, that's really troublesome. Recently, there were more and more uninvited guests who secretly visited the family, and their strength was getting stronger and stronger. They used all kinds of means. Rui couldn't fight with others in the future. If he left, the guards of the Li family, including those ordinary masters, could not guarantee that nothing would go wrong. It was really a headache. I'll go. Mississippi Lou clenched her sword and said. No. Rui refused immediately. You're no match for the Taoist nun. I'll act according to circumstances. No. Outside the Li family's mansion, the servants of the Li family looked at an unfamiliar old man standing at the door and asked, may I ask who you're looking for? Although the old man was a little sloppy, the people who could come to the county earl's mansion were all well-known figures in the capital. They didn't dare to judge a person by his appearance. Killing a small county earl. If it weren't for the fact that I'm short of money these days, I wouldn't dare to do such a stupid thing. The sloppy old man threw a milky white lump into his mouth and said, is County Earl of Chang and Li in there? Although he was a grandmaster, grandmasters were not above the common people. They also needed to eat and drink. Although it was shameful to do this kind of killer's work, he had never cared about this kind of thing in the past. This time, he was asked by a family with whom he had a little connection when he was young to take the life of County Earl Li. 100,000 taels of silver was the reward. The servant of the Li family said honestly, no. The sloppy old man was stunned and asked, where did he go? He went out and hasn't come back yet. The old man frowned and said, in that case, I'll wait here for him to come back. As soon as the old man finished speaking, the servant only felt that everything in front of him went black, and then he collapsed on the ground powerlessly. You're lucky. 100,000 taels of silver for one life. I said one life, and I mean it. I'm a man of my word. The sloppy old man murmured and knocked out several maids and servants in the courtyard. He also casually took care of several people who looked like guards. Hearing a sound coming from a courtyard, he strode in. I only kill. The sloppy old man didn't finish his sentence. He was stunned when he saw several figures standing in the courtyard. He immediately bowed to the ground and said, I'm sorry. I went the wrong way. Cough, cough. After saying that, he turned around and left without any hesitation. Because he was too nervous, the candy just now was stuck in his throat, and he didn't dare to swallow it immediately. Come back. An old voice came from behind. The sloppy old man stopped, turned around, and knelt on the ground. I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Please spare my life, Senior. His voice was trembling, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Not bad. The old man looked down at him and nodded with satisfaction. He said, "Get up. What's the matter? Get up and talk." Chapter 641. Did you hear me? Second great uncle asked while lying on the rocking chair. Yes. The sloppy old man stood aside respectfully and nodded like a chicken pecking rice. Second great uncle glared at him. Listen carefully. Hurry up and go. The sloppy old man hurriedly reminded him, Senior, I forgot the antidote. The old man threw a porcelain bottle over and said, There are 100 antidotes here. Each one can suppress the poison in your body for 2 days. That is to say, 7 months at most. If you still can't bring her back after 7 months, what will happen? The sloppy old man asked with a trembling voice. Her limbs will be stiff and she will bleed from her orifices. Within 2 hours, she will turn into a pool of pus. The sloppy old man's expression changed drastically and he said, Senior, can you give me a few more? The world is so big and it's so difficult to find a person. What if you still can't find her after 7 months? Second great uncle nodded and said, So, you can't delay. The sloppy old man was speechless. Not long after, the sloppy old man walked out of the Leaf family with a horse, looking dispirited. He lifted his sleeve and looked at his arm, looking even more dispirited. This time, it was a real poison, damned Taoist nun, damned old monster. He quickly got on the horse and put away the token in his bosom. With this thing, he would be able to gather enough information along the way. Go! The old man waved his whip and a cloud of dust quickly rose on the road. Second great uncle, I'm worried about my husband. How about I go with him? Rui walked forward with an anxious look on her face. What's the use of you going? Second great uncle glanced at her and said, You're pregnant now. Can you fight with a guru? Don't use your true chi before the child is born. There has never been a lack of geniuses in the martial arts world. There were peerless masters who reached the top at a young age. Why didn't they have children? Also, have you forgotten why your father destroyed his own martial arts? If there's any mistake, you two won't be able to live in peace for the rest of your lives. Rui bit her lip and finally fell silent. Where's Rui? The old man suddenly asked. She went to Lu Mang. Rui looked up at the west and sighed, I wonder how much Xiang has suffered, these fruits are all wilted and not fresh at all. Do you have pears? Give me 2 fresh pears. Li Yi laid comfortably on a soft bed and pointed at the blue-clothed man in the room. Where can I find fresh pears for you in this season? The blue-clothed man's eyes were almost spitting fire. He said angrily, Moreover, this is a ship. Don't go too far. Are you coming? Wait a minute. The blue-robed man's face fell as he strode out of the room. Li Yi rubbed his head and threw a candied date into his mouth. He had been on the boat for 2 hours and his head was a little dizzy. Meeting that damned Taoist nun aside, today was actually a very happy day. He was finally going to have a child. This was something that he had never experienced in his 2 lifetimes. However, Rui must be very worried now. Xiao Huan must be crying. Mississippi Lu must be unhappy too. He had promised her another 100,000 taels of silver in a few days. He didn't know how long it would take. The old emperor was probably not in a good mood either. He had earned a lot of money these days. He had planned to persuade him to confiscate a few people's properties. This was the fastest way to earn money, but he had to wait until he came back. He still hoped that he could hang on for a little longer. If he died early, the Jing kingdom would be in chaos. After all, the king of Shu would not be able to return to the capital alive. The other princes would definitely be locked in a fierce battle. At that time, the eldest princess, Yongning, and the proud Lolita, the pairs you wanted. The blue-clothed man walked in and placed 2 yellow pears on the plate on the table. You really have them? Li Yi asked in surprise. The corner of the blue-clothed man's mouth twitched. He had almost rummaged through the warehouse to find these 2 pears. This despicable fellow, how dare he make fun of me like this? If not for her ladyship's instructions, he swore that he would have killed him. Unfortunately, they are not fresh. Li Yi shook his head and said, Oh yes, do you have wine? Drinking wine is a hindrance. Her ladyship forbids it. Bring a jar of wine over. Let me tell you, don't go too far. Are you going to bring it or not? This wine doesn't have any taste. Li Yi shook his head. However, it was fine. If he really brought the wine from Rui workshop, he would not be able to handle it. Suddenly, Li Yi thought of something. He pointed outside and said, I saw a pleasure boat just now. Do you want to call 2 women from there? Forget it. Seeing that the blue-clothed man was on the verge of exploding, Li Yi waved his hand and said, I don't need women. It's rare to be happy today. Let me treat you to a drink. Her ladyship said that we can't drink wine. Where are we going? Li Yi took a bite of the pear and asked with a smile. A trace of confusion appeared on the blue-clothed man's face. He said, Of course, we are going to the Qi kingdom. The root of our holy religion is in the Qi kingdom. I'm not bragging, but we have 100,000 believers in the Qi kingdom, so many. Li Yi had a surprised expression on his face. A multi-level marketing organization that had 100,000 members could be regarded as a classic example. Who didn't know how to brainwash? If he could get these people over, the blue-clothed man showed a disdainful expression and said, This is nothing. Not only the Qi kingdom, but also your Jing kingdom. The holy religion has many believers. We deliberately took a detour to go to the Shu kingdom. You know the king of Shu, right? Yes, I've heard of him, but I'm not familiar with him. Li Yi nodded. When he was about to continue asking, he suddenly heard a bang. The blue-clothed man fell on the table and snored. Carry him out. The middle-aged Taoist nun walked in from outside the cabin and waved her hand. Immediately, someone carried the blue-clothed man out. What do you think? As long as you join our holy religion, you will immediately receive the treatment of a protector. I hope you can consider it carefully. I don't even need the Lu Alliance to work for our holy religion. The Taoist nun said. When she looked up again, she found that the young man in front of her had fallen asleep on the soft couch. She frowned and turned to walk out of the room. She waved her sleeves and gently closed the door. Keep an eye on him, she said to the 2 people at the door, then floated away. Li Xian happily stepped into the mansion. As soon as he entered, he said loudly, I just met Lu Jimin at the palace gate. He said. He looked at the young servant girl with red and swollen eyes and asked, What happened? Who bullied you? After a while, he walked out of the Li mansion with a gloomy face. He got on the carriage and said in a low voice, to the palace. That boy's wife is pregnant. Emperor Jing put down the accounts in his hands and temporarily suppressed the joy of nearly 1 million taels of silver entering the national treasury. He smiled and said, Pass the decree that Chang and County Earl Li Yi is dedicated to his duty and shared the emperor's worries. He will be granted the title of Marquis of Chang and County. His wife, Lady Liu, is smart, virtuous, dignified and elegant. Chang De hurried in from outside the hall. He looked up at Emperor Jing and said, Your Majesty, County Earl Li Yi is in trouble, bastard. How could such a thing happen under the emperor's rule? Emperor Jing's face darkened. The next moment, he covered his chest and frowned deeply. After a quarter of an hour, a group of fast horses galloped out of the palace gate. The secret intelligence office turned out in full force, which made the officials and nobles in the capital tremble. The Glaze Bazaar had just ended. Was His Majesty going to make a big move again? When Li Yi woke up from his sleep, it was already dusk. He pushed open the door and walked out. On the sparkling river, there were groups of pleasure boats and laughter. He didn't know where he was. "Aren't we leaving?" He looked at the two people at the door and asked. "The river is congested at this time. Her ladyship has ordered us to leave after midnight." Li nodded and said, "It's still early. Why don't we go up and listen to the opera and watch the singing and dancing?" "What did you do to me just now?" The man in blue walked over angrily from the side. "I want to go up and listen to the opera. Do you want to come with me?" The man in blue said angrily, "Don't even think about it. I won't be fooled by you again. You can only stay on the boat. You can't go anywhere." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Then I'll go and ask your ladyship." After a quarter of an hour. "Look, isn't it more interesting to go out than to stay on the boat?" Li Yi looked back at the dozen people behind him, pointed to the front and said, "There is a brothel in front. Go in and watch the opera and listen to the stories. If you see anything you like, just buy it. I'll be the host today. Remember to go back and ask your ladyship for reimbursement." Chapter 642. Usually, they did not pay much attention to places like the brothel. Seeing it today, the apostles of the holy religion were surprised to find that the play in the brothel was actually so interesting. By Sujin, humans and demons cannot love each other. The sea of bitterness is boundless, repent and you will be saved. On the stage, a monk wearing a bright yellow kasaya held an alms bowl in his hand and pointed it at the woman in white on the ground. The woman looked up at the monk and said in a sad voice, "Fahai, I and the official are really in love. Why are you so aggressive?" "Amitba." The monk said the name of Buddha inside. "In that case, I have to accept you." The audience under the stage shook their heads and sighed. What a love between humans and demons. The Legend of the White Snake was a long-lasting play. Even after watching it several times, they could still see some freshness in it. "You old bald donkey, why did you break them up? I will kill you." A young man rushed onto the stage angrily and kicked the monk to the ground. The alms bowl rolled far away. The monk who was kicked to the ground was stunned. The white snake was stunned. The audience under the stage was stunned. The dozen apostles were also stunned. The plot of the Legend of the White Snake was wonderful, and the performance of the two actors on the stage was even more vivid. However, it was rare to see someone like this young man who was immersed in the play. Obviously, he really regarded the actor who played Fahai as an old bald donkey who wanted to break up the lovers. Several strong men hurried onto the stage and walked in the direction of the young man. However, they were stopped by two men who jumped onto the stage. "Get out of the way, don't interfere with the performance." Several strong men were about to come over. However, although the two people were thin and weak, their strength was not small. The few men could not cross their line of defense at all. That Fahai tore off the kasaya on his body. He wanted to cry but had no tears. He said, "I am not Fahai." He rubbed his butt, and his heart was really full of mixed feelings. Although he had been kicked, as an actor, what could be more proud of than playing a role to the point where the audience couldn't tell what was inside or outside the play? I am sorry, the young man finally came to his senses and said awkwardly. He jumped off the stage and said in a low voice, "What are you waiting for? Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough?" After saying that, he quickly walked out of the door. The few of them exchanged looks and shook their heads. He was the one who was embarrassed, not them. However, the old monk had acted really well. They nearly had the urge to jump up and beat him to death. Seeing that the young man had already walked out, they hurriedly followed. Haha, that young man was really interesting. It's also because of that guy's good acting. He really brought Fa Hai to life. To be honest, I also wanted to rush up and kick him. Haha, I agree, I agree. A burst of laughter came from below the stage. The monk climbed up from the stage and said with a smile, "Thank you for your appreciation. This show is over. The next show, Flooding Jinshan, will begin in 15 minutes. Amidst the laughter of the crowd, he slowly retreated behind the curtain and took out a small wooden tablet from his bosom. After carefully examining it, his expression suddenly changed. "Quick, prepare the horses, we're going to the capital." At the same time, Li Yi, who had walked out of the brothel, secretly sighed. The brothels scattered in various places would only hire some people to be responsible for maintaining order. They were all ordinary men, and few of them knew martial arts. The 11 people following him were not easy to deal with. Moreover, the Taoist nun was not far away. He knew better than anyone else the strength of a guru. The only thing he could do at the moment was to send a message back. "Thank God, my husband is fine." As Ru Yi held the wooden token in her hand, her worried heart finally calmed down. A bald man panted and said, it was not convenient for His Excellency to reveal his identity at that time, so he made this urgent plan. "I didn't dare to delay and immediately came here overnight." "You've worked hard." "Not at all, not at all." The man smiled and said, "It's His Excellency who has given us performers a living. It's our honor to do something for His Excellency." "Thank you very much." Ri looked at him and turned her head to say, "Uncle Li, go to the cashier and withdraw 1,000 taels of silver." The little maid ran out with swollen eyes and said in a panic, "First miss, second miss is missing. She hasn't come back since last night." The morning assembly had just ended. The courtiers walked out of the main hall with confusion, shock, and doubt on their faces. It was rare for so many emotions to appear on the faces of hundreds of officials on such a large scale. Uncle Li of County Li was missing. Uncle Li, who was the most favored by the emperor in today's court and could influence half of the court, was missing. His Majesty was in a very bad mood today. The morning assembly that usually lasted at least 2 hours ended in less than a quarter of an hour. The strangest thing was that an official was kicked by the furious old General Shui just because he had a little doubt about the calculation school. His Majesty did not say a word and just announced the end of the assembly. Until now, they still hadn't recovered from this news. An hour later, in an official's mansion. "Li Yi is missing. Should we forget it? Let's put this matter aside for now." If he was still in the capital, this would be a dispute in the court. But now that he is missing, if we take the opportunity to make a move, I'm afraid it will anger a lot of people. "You saw it, old General Shui in the main hall just now. I also don't think it's appropriate. Whether it's those people in the imperial court or His Majesty, they won't allow anyone to add insult to injury at this time. In my opinion, Li Yi has offended so many people that there's an 80% chance he'll never return. Without him, there's nothing to worry about." They did not expect the situation to change so quickly. They quickly finalized some things. Without Li Yi, there is one less biggest stumbling block in front of the King of Shu. "Congratulations, congratulations, Zumo, what's wrong with you these days? Are you not feeling well?" Wan Ruoqing looked at Sing Zumo, who was sitting on the stone bench in the yard in a daze, and asked worriedly. "Zumo. Zumo." Wan Ruoqing walked over and waved her hand in front of her eyes. "Ah." Sing Zumo came back to her senses and said, "Don't bother. I've asked Xiao Chui to buy breakfast." Wan Ruoqing was startled. She reached out and touched her forehead, saying, "It's not hot, but you've been really strange these days. I'll ask Yuzhu to get a doctor." "There's really no need." Sing Zumo waved her hand. At this time, Xiao Chui ran in from outside in a panic and said loudly, "Outside, outside, everyone is saying that Li is missing." Wan Ruoqing's expression froze, and Sing Zumo stood up abruptly. Cheers! In the drunken moon tower, several young men frequently clinked their glasses, their voices full of joy. That scourge has finally received retribution. I really hope I never see him again. Yes, if he's going to disappear, it's better to be thorough. Every time I think about this, I can't help but want to laugh. Several famous playboys in the capital swept away their gloomy mood and their faces were full of smiles. I heard that he has 2 lovers in Willow Lane. Li Jianren's face showed an inexplicable smile, and he said, this time, he can't even protect himself. Let's see who can protect them. Say, even if he can come back and see that those 2 lovers are all ready. What will he think? There was another burst of laughter. Suddenly, someone looked at the young man in the corner and said, Zijian, I heard that Miss Singh, who caused us so much trouble last time, has something to do with your family. Sing Zijian shook his head and said, what Miss Singh? I don't know. Li Jianren laughed and gritted his teeth, if that's the case, then I won't be polite. At the same time, in a courtyard somewhere in the capital, a man with thin cheeks and wearing a blue robe looked at the dozens of people in the courtyard and said, you are all the elites of the holy religion left in the capital. The Empress has ordered us to lie low and endure. However, although the Empress has left the capital, there is still her incarnation in the capital. Since we have entered the holy religion, it is our duty to protect the Empress and strengthen the holy religion. Chapter 643. Some officials in the capital city had been waiting anxiously for a long time. Finally, the news of the imperial concubine came. The series of measures against the Earl of Chang and was temporarily cancelled. This made them heave a long sigh of relief in their hearts. The atmosphere in the court was not right these days. Of course, this kind of abnormality was mostly reflected in His Majesty. There were already quite a few ignorant officials who were reprimanded in court for making small mistakes, so there were quite a few who were demoted. Until now, the officials realized that the position of the county earldly in His Majesty's heart was probably higher than they had expected. Besides rejoicing, there was also a little fear in their hearts. They were afraid because if they really chose to fight with him head-on, they were afraid that the loss on their side would be too great to bear. As for rejoicing, it was naturally because such a person was not in the capital city, and it was very likely that he would never come back. Otherwise, the return of His Highness, the King of Shu, would be greatly hindered. No one wanted to have such an enemy. Not to mention how many people stood behind him, just counting the school, many officials were tied to him. Once the accounts were checked, there would be a purge in the court. The power that belonged to His Highness, the King of Shu, really could not stand any more torment. After some depression and wind and rain, the capital city returned to the surface of calmness. In the hall of diligent government, Emperor Jing put down the memorial, rubbed between his eyebrows, and said in a deep voice, "Send more people. Send 10 executives in the palace out. If they can't find him, don't come back." Changde's figure silently retreated. In the wide square of the Ganlu Hall, a figure was moving, and the sword shadows were dense. A gray-haired old woman stood in the distance and looked at it, sighing slowly. Not long after, the figure stopped and walked here. He did not look at the golden egg fried rice on the stone steps, but carried the jar of wine beside him into the hall. In the mathematics college, the classroom was empty at lunchtime. Li Xian looked out of the window absent-mindedly. Another handsome man came in with a lunch box and put it in front of him. After glancing at him, he walked out without saying a word. Outside the college, Li Han's chubby figure had lost a lot of weight. At this moment, he was standing in the corner with his hands behind his back, loudly reprimanding several young men. 10 days. The young maidservant sat in the courtyard, counting the days with her fingers. Although her face was much paler than before, it was still somewhat healthy. Son-in-law had sent a letter a few days ago, saying that he had an urgent matter to attend to in a faraway place and would only be back after a very long time. How long was a very long time? A month? Or 2 months? She was actually very happy that Miss was pregnant, but the son-in-law was not around, and even the second Miss had disappeared for almost 10 days. She just could not be happy. Hearing the voice behind her, she looked back and immediately stood up. She hurriedly ran over and said, "Miss, don't move. Let me do it." There was a lot of space inside the carriage, and it was covered with a thick brocade couch. However, it was still a little bumpy on the official road. These people seemed to be in a hurry. Except for the first night when the river was congested, they had to stop for a short while. After that, they hurried on day and night. Apart from Taoist nun, there were dozens of people accompanying them. Without exception, all of them were masters. Li Yi had seen 2 of them in purple at the Hero Conference. They were all masters in the heaven list. The other people in blue also gave off an extraordinary feeling. Not counting the Taoist nun, this kind of strength in the Jianghu could be considered as a not insignificant force. Taoist nun gave him a very strange feeling. Apart from a few words in the beginning, she had not taken the initiative to speak again. She did not even mention the method of making colored glaze. However, as for the various requests that Kiran made to test Kiran and even his rude and excessive actions, Kiran agreed to all of them without hesitation. The more she acted like this, the more he felt that she was plotting something big. He took out a painting scroll from his sleeve. This was the one he had obtained from the man in blue. After slowly unfolding it, he saw the woman in the painting. A look of confusion appeared on his face. "I don't think so." After a long time, he shook his head and dispelled an unrealistic thought from his mind. Holy religion. Li Yi leaned against the carriage and slowly said a few words. Good stuff. In another carriage ahead, a middle-aged Taoist nun sat cross-legged with a thin book in her hand. In the 6th month of the first year of Jinghe, Qing and Prefecture, Li family village. On the 7th day of the 7th month, immortal at the Magpie Bridge, the unknown scholar's name shook Qing and Prefecture. On the 15th day of the 8th month, Shuidiao Getu, he was awarded the title of #1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom. Candied haws, rui nectar, strong wine, scented soap, perfume, master of heavenly punishment, changed interrogation by torture, innovated mathematics, turned the tide, defeated the envoy of the Qi kingdom. After a while, the Taoist nun put the book to one side and said, "Invite that guest over." "Yes, madam." Immediately, one of the men turned his horse around and rode to the front of another carriage. He said to the people standing guard outside, "Her ladyship has orders to invite this guest over." "Sho." One of the men made a shushing gesture and said, "Keep your voice down." He fell asleep again. The man's face showed an expression of disbelief. The others nodded helplessly. "Forget it, I'll go report to her ladyship." The man shook his head helplessly, turned his horse around again and rode forward. He had seen people who liked to sleep, but this was the first time he had seen someone who slept during the day and slept at night, only waking up for meals. No wonder her ladyship treated him so specially. After all, there weren't many people in this world who liked to sleep so much. Then let's wait for him to wake up. After reporting the truth, there was a pause before a voice came from inside the carriage. It was already late at night in the capital. There was less than an hour left until the curfew. There were almost no pedestrians on the streets. 2 slightly tired figures walked out of a brothel. A few steps behind them, several figures followed closely behind. One Ruoqing turned her head and asked, "Zumo, are you really going to the Xing family tomorrow?" Zumo nodded and said, "I want to go there and bring back my parents' memorial tablets." One Ruoqing thought about it and said, "I'll go with you." Zumo shook her head. "No need. It's not a dangerous place. I'll be fine alone. Alright, I'll wait for you outside the Xing family tomorrow. Wan Ruoqing nodded and then sighed. I wonder how he is. There hasn't been any news from the brothel for a long time. Zumo raised her head, and a trace of deep regret appeared on her face. If she hadn't asked Xiao Chui to lie to him that day, if she had asked him to stay for just a quarter of an hour, would that incident not have happened? Who? Suddenly, an explosive shout came from behind them. The 8 people immediately rushed forward and surrounded Wan Ruoqing and Xing Zumo with their backs to the outside. One of them even unsheathed his weapon and revealed a vigilant expression as he pointed to a distant alley on the side. One person looked into the darkness and said coldly, "Stop hiding and come out." Only the man's words echoed in the dark alley. There was still no sound. Chapter 644. You 4, escort the 2 girls and leave. We'll take care of this. The leader turned around and ordered. Suddenly, a "shio" sound came from the air. He staggered and covered his shoulder. He immediately said, "There are archers on the other side, quickly dodge." Swoosh. Swoosh. However, his warning was a little too late. After a few sounds, 3 more people were shot. Fortunately, the wounds were not fatal. Their expressions changed. One of them immediately took out a bamboo tube and lit it without hesitation. A dazzling white light suddenly lit up from his hand and exploded in the night sky. Move quickly. Catch the 2 women. Kill the others. A low voice finally came from the depths of the alley, and more than 10 people walked out from it. In the deepest part of the alley, a masked young man smiled coldly. Did you go out with them again yesterday? Xing Shichen asked his son as soon as the banquet ended. Xing Zijin nodded and said, Yes, I just went out for dinner. Don't hang out with them in the future. Xing Shichen frowned and said, When the king of Shu gains power in the future, he can get you an official position in the court. Keep your spirits up. Don't hang out with those people all day and give up on yourself. I know. Xing Zijin nodded and said. Not long after, Xing Zijin looked at his father's back with a trace of sarcasm on his face. Ever since he broke a leg and almost died, Li Jianren's temperament had changed drastically. Even the few people who were close to him had gradually distanced themselves from him. This time, after Li Yi disappeared, he had said many times that he wanted to take revenge for the humiliation he had suffered in the past. He knew that the 2 women were protected by experts, and this was not a small matter at all. He had made ample preparations. He had even gone there personally to witness that scene with his own eyes. Now, he had probably succeeded, right? Xing Zumo. In the entire Xing family, only his father thought so. Xing Zijin's mouth twitched, and he got up to walk to his room. He would get news of Li Jianren by tomorrow night at the latest. Dazzling fireworks exploded in the night sky. Within a few breaths, the nearest brothels were quickly lit up. However, it was too late. The arrow is poisoned. The 4 people who were shot were lying on the ground, their faces pale. The other 4 were protecting the 2 women behind them. When they saw the dozen people walking out of the alley, their faces turned ugly. Who are you people? The leader of the group asked coldly. Don't let him stall for time, the leader of the opposing side said calmly. Kill. He didn't expect the other party to be so decisive. The man's face completely darkened as he said, Ladies, we can only hold them off for a while. You 2 run quickly to the nearest brothel. After saying that, he took the lead and rushed forward. The signal had already been sent. As long as they could buy some time for reinforcements to arrive, these people would no longer be a threat. The other 3 glanced at each other before pouncing forward one after another. Although Wan Ruoqing and Xing Zumo looked anxious, they also knew that the two of them would only be a burden here. They quickly turned around and ran back. How could the opposing side let the two of them go? Immediately, 4 people quickly chased after them. The few men were entangled and could only watch helplessly as they passed by them. Let's see where you can run to. The 4 people walked side by side. When they passed a certain street corner, a sneer appeared on their faces. However, at this street corner, a blade suddenly flashed, and 4 heads rolled to the ground. Disrespecting the queen, you deserve to die. A figure walked out from behind with a bloody long blade in his hand and said coldly. More and more figures walked out from behind him and turned their heads at the same time, looking at the deep alley not far ahead. Why haven't they come back yet? Seeing that the 4 people who were not afraid of death actually stopped everyone, and there was still no news of the 4 people who had just left, the leader finally frowned. The 4 of them all had extraordinary skills, but it took them such a long time to deal with 2 weak women. If they delayed any longer, the situation might change. The man was about to open his mouth to adjust his plan, but at some point, he saw many figures rushing over from the opposite side. His expression finally changed. They're finally here. The eyes of the 4 big men lit up, and they no longer continued to fight. They quickly retreated to the back and said to the figures, "These brothers are injured. We'll take them to find a doctor first. I'll leave this to you." After saying that, they quickly carried the 4 people on the ground and went to the nearest clinic. "Ladies, there's nothing here." After a while, a man held a torch in his hand and looked around. Except for the blood on the ground, there was no one at all. It was clearly here just now. They just told us to go first. Wan Ruoqing walked over, and after looking around, her face showed an anxious expression. It's impossible. The man also looked puzzled. At this moment, a man covered in blood ran over from afar and asked, "It's all thanks to you. Are the 2 ladies all right? Where are the others?" Wan Ruoqing hurriedly walked over and asked, "How are your injuries?" "They're all in the clinic in front." Seeing that the 2 of them were safe, the man let out a long sigh of relief and said, "They're all superficial wounds, it's not a big deal. Just now, thanks to these brothers who arrived in time, otherwise, I might really lose my life here today." "Which brothers?" The man opposite asked with a puzzled expression. "What happened just now? Weren't you the ones who rushed over just now?" The man asked with a puzzled expression. "Not far from here, in a hidden courtyard." "Tell me, who ordered you to do this?" More than 10 people were tied up and kneeling in the courtyard. A young man pulled the black cloth off one of their faces and asked slowly. The man sneered, clenched his teeth and said, "Don't even think about it, I advise you." With a flash of saber light, a head flew up and rolled not far away. The headless corpse fell to the ground. The young man walked down to the next one. "Tell me, who ordered you to do this?" Seeing his companion's head separated from his body, the man's complexion changed. He said, "You had better not." With another flash of saber light, the young man walked in front of the 3rd person. "Tell me, who ordered you to do this?" The black-clothed man pointed at the last person and said with a trembling voice, It was Li Li, it was young Master Li Jianren. I beg you, don't kill me. Disrespecting the Heavenly Empress, you all deserve to die." The young man took a step back and waved his hand. In an instant, several saber lights appeared in the courtyard. The young man walked to the last black-clothed man in the courtyard and slowly said, "Now, it's your turn." The figure's body was already trembling like a sieve. He said, You dare kill me. My father is the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works, you can't kill me. Young master, assistant minister of the Ministry of Works, I've offended you. The young man looked at him without any emotion in his eyes. In the next moment, there was the sound of a saber cutting into flesh. Li Jianren's eyes suddenly widened and then he did not close them again. Chapter 645. The time when Xing Zijin saw Li Jianren again was not as early as he had expected. Because Li Jianren was missing. As a famous playboy in the capital city, it was not a big deal for him not to go home at night. He often stayed in brothels at night and enjoyed himself all night. It was common for him to go home at noon or in the afternoon the next day. Especially after Li Jianren broke his leg and almost died, he completely abandoned himself to despair. It was not unusual for him not to go home for several days in a row. It seemed that the Li family had completely given up on him and began to support another direct descendant of the Li family, who had not been valued so much before. However, all the playboys, including Xing Zijin, understood that Li Jianren did not go to seek pleasure last night. More than 10 assassins dealing with 2 weak women should have been a simple matter. However, until noon the next day, not only was there no news from those people, even Li Jianren had disappeared without a trace. This matter was a little unusual. Something is wrong. Did something happen to him? What could possibly happen to so many people? Could it be that those 2 women managed to kill all of them without making a sound? In a restaurant, several playboys looked uncertain. Xing Zijin said with a sullen face, "Let's go to the Li family." In the hall of the county government, County Magistrate Lu's face was not very good. Early in the morning, someone reported that they were besieged by a group of people who suddenly appeared in an alley last night. Those people even used bows and arrows. 4 of them were injured and were still lying in the clinic. The capital city was under the rule of the emperor, so the public security was naturally the best in the whole Jing kingdom. Although some crimes could not be avoided, it was the first time for him to be intercepted and killed on the road since he took office. More importantly, the case involved 2 important people, so he had to treat it carefully. Seeing a constable coming in from outside, County Magistrate Lu stood up and asked, "Have you found anything?" The bailiff cupped his hands and said, "Sir, we are already following the traces of blood left at the scene. I believe we will have results very soon." County Magistrate Lu frowned. This case was also strange. According to those men, they were almost unable to hold on last night, but a group of people suddenly appeared and saved them. At that time, they were in a hurry to treat their companions. When they came back later, they found that the group of villains and the reinforcements had disappeared at the same time. What was even more bizarre was that they didn't know who had saved them. 2 groups of people suddenly appeared and disappeared. This was the first time he had encountered such a strange case in his many years as an official. A bailiff came over and reported, "Darren, the servants of Assistant Minister Li's family have come to report that their young master has gone missing." "Which Assistant Minister Li?" County Magistrate Lu raised his head and asked. The bailiff replied, "Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works." "How long has he been missing?" 12 hours. County Magistrate Lu waved his hand and said, "Let them search all the major brothels in the capital first. If they can't find him in 72 hours, then come back to report." 12 hours was nothing for the group of playboys in the capital. There was once a playboy among playboys who stayed in a brothel for 7 days and 7 nights. He set a record that still hadn't been broken. County Magistrate Lu said impatiently and said to another bailiff, "Let's go and see how their investigation is going." He had just walked out of the county office with a few bailiffs when a bailiff ran over in a hurry. When he raised his head and saw County Magistrate Lu, he said with a pale face, "Sir, something big has happened." County Magistrate Lu's heart skipped a beat when he saw the extremely frightened expression on his face. His heart gradually sank. "Sir, it's just up ahead." With the bailiff in the lead, County Magistrate Lu led a group of bailiffs through streets and alleys. Finally, they arrived in front of a house deep in the alley. The bailiff's face was pale. He swallowed his saliva and said, "Sir, we followed the traces all the way and finally found this place." County Magistrate Liu looked at him and asked, "Are the murderers here?" "They are all inside." The bailiff nodded and said. County Magistrate Liu nodded with satisfaction. Recently, he was more and more satisfied with the work of the bailiffs in the county office. 15 murderers, without exception, were all beheaded. One of them was pierced through the heart by a sword. It seems to be Li Jianren, the son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works. The bailiff added. "Who did you say?" County Magistrate Liu suddenly turned his head and asked with shock in his eyes. The bailiff said with a pale face, "Sir, before you go in, you must be mentally prepared." County Magistrate Liu's face changed greatly. He turned his head and strode in, followed by several bailiffs and bailiffs. E.W. The next moment, a chorus of sounds came from the courtyard. Not long after, County Magistrate Liu walked out of the courtyard with the help of 2 bailiffs. He held onto the wall to steady himself. "The few of you stay here and protect the scene." Forcing himself to forget about the scene of carnage in the courtyard, he waved his hand and said in a trembling voice, immediately report to the Ministry of Justice." 16 people had died, and 15 people had their heads chopped off. Looking at their clothes, it should be what the man had said. They were undoubtedly the people who had ambushed them last night. However, he didn't expect that these people, who were supposed to be murderers, would all die a violent death. Although the pool of blood in the courtyard had solidified, the pungent smell and the cruel scene still attacked all his senses. More importantly, the son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works was among the dead. Previously, the son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights had been poisoned to death, which had enraged His Majesty and almost turned the entire capital city upside down. This time, even the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works had been killed, and more than 10 other people had died. This was the most serious case that had happened in the capital city in recent years. Moreover, the son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Works had led a group of killers to kill 2 women. This was another big case. It should be noted that there was still no conclusion to the murder of the son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights, the framing of Miss Singh, and the night attack by the men of sacrifice. No matter how he looked at it, this matter was not something he could be involved in. It could be predicted that there would be a reign of terror in the imperial court this time. He sent bailiffs to report this matter everywhere. When he walked back to the county office, his legs were still a little weak. He had just sat down when someone suddenly came to report that Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works had come to visit. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works was only half a rank higher than him. As the magistrate of the capital city, he didn't need to be too humble. However, at this moment, his expression was quite complicated because he didn't know how to tell the news to the assistant minister. The bailiffs had just been sent out by him and shouldn't have arrived at the Li family yet, which meant that Assistant Minister Li didn't know that his son and he were already in 2 different worlds. "Lord Liu." The middle-aged man came over and saluted him. With a complicated expression, Magistrate Liu returned the salute and said, "Lord Li, my son didn't return last night. I was really worried that something had happened to him. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble Lord Liu this time." The middle-aged man looked at the unfamiliar magistrate of the capital city. At this moment, he had already learned what had happened from Zhang Zijian and others, so he was worried. Naturally, he wouldn't think that his son didn't return last night because he was seeking pleasure in a brothel. After learning that Lord Liu didn't attach much importance to this matter, he hurried over immediately. Magistrate Liu sighed and said, "To tell you the truth, Lord Li, we've found your son." "Where is he?" The middle-aged man's face lit up. Chapter 646. In a courtyard deep in a street in the capital city. Jianren, Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works, was pale and bloodless. He slowly squatted down and touched Li Jianren's cold body. There was a long sword in the young man's chest. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth was open. One could vaguely see the fear in his eyes. His body was already cold. The middle-aged man reached out his hand and closed his eyelids. He slowly stood up, closed his eyes, and said, "Lord Liu, who killed my son?" County Magistrate Liu sighed and said, "The Ministry of Justice has already sent someone to deal with this case. Lord Liu, please restrain your grief." The middle-aged man opened his eyes and said, "Bring Jianren back." Several guards of the Li family came forward and covered Li Jianren's body with a white cloth. A supervisor of the Ministry of Justice frowned and was about to step forward when he was stopped by a young man beside him. "It's okay." "Yes, Assistant Minister Liu." The supervisor of the Ministry of Justice took a step back and said respectfully. The middle-aged man and several guards of the Li family left with Li Jianren's body. From beginning to end, they didn't say a word. 1. County Magistrate Liu looked at the young man beside him and opened his mouth. Only then did he realize that the person in front of him was no longer a constable under him, but an assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. In terms of official rank, he was even higher than him. He changed his words and said, "Assistant Minister Liu, I'll leave this case to you. I'll ask them to hand over the file to the Ministry of Justice later. I'll leave this case to you." "Lord Liu, you're too polite." Liu Yi smiled and cupped his hands. County Magistrate Liu nodded and turned to leave. When he walked to the door, he seemed to think of something and turned his head again. He said, "This case involves the two girls. Lord Li is not here." The son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works attacked the two girls at night with more than 10 killers. Later, they were all killed by an unknown force. Liu Yi said slowly, "A few months ago, someone poisoned the son of the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Rights and tried to frame Lady Zuamo. Then, a large number of men of sacrifice attacked Willow Alley at night. I think these things may be related. I also think it's a little strange." County Magistrate Liu nodded and walked out of the door. "Speak." Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works had a calm expression as he slowly spat out a word. Xing Zijian, Chen Lisan, and the others stood in place, their faces pale. They looked at the corpse covered in white cloth, and their bodies trembled. Xing Zijian swallowed his saliva and said, "Uncle Li, speak." The middle-aged man said expressionlessly, "Where did Jianren go last night?" He was suspicious of what they had said before. If it was just two commoner girls, how could things have turned out like this? The middle-aged man looked down and closed his eyes in pain. Li Yi went missing, and Jianren said he wanted to take revenge. Chen Lisan lowered his head, gritted his teeth, and said, He brought people to cause trouble for Li Yi's two lovers. What are the names of those two women?" The middle-aged man asked in a low voice. "Xing Zumo, Wan Ruoqing," Chen Lisan said immediately. The middle-aged man repeated the two names a few times, then turned around and walked out of the door without looking at the playboys again. Li Jianren was dead. Li Jianren was actually dead. Xing Zijian still couldn't accept this reality when he walked out of the door of the Li mansion. There was no suspense at all. Why did it end up like this? Qin Yu was slapped by Li Yi in public, and King Duanyang was kicked away by Li Yi. The most serious thing was that His Royal Highness King of Shu was beaten up, and they, the popinjays, were beaten by His Majesty. However, Li Jianren's body was just in front of him. Just yesterday, they were still drinking and chatting merrily, talking about how they would take revenge on that person. Why did everything change after he left? It became even more. Xing Zijian didn't know how he walked back home until he felt a burning pain on his face. He raised his head in disbelief and looked at his father, who was glaring at him. "You bastard!" When Xing Shichen slapped him a second time, blood was already flowing out of the corner of Xing Zijian's mouth. However, these two slaps didn't seem to vent Xing Shichen's anger. He looked around and actually picked up a chair beside him. A middle-aged woman rushed forward and hugged him tightly. She said to Tsing Zijian, "What are you waiting for? Run." Tsing Zijian's expression changed. He immediately flashed back to his room and closed the door from the inside. Unfilial son, open the door. The assistant minister's face was full of anger. He punched the door, but there was no movement inside. Tsing Zijian leaned against the door with a pale face. After knocking a few times, Tsing Shiqian's expression darkened. He took a step back and said, "Someone, lock this door and open it in 3 days." The woman's expression changed and she hurriedly said, "Master, no, 3 days, Zijian will starve to death in 3 days. If he really starves to death, I'll pretend that I never gave birth to this unfilial son." Tsing Shiqian put away the key, waved his sleeves, and strode away. The woman stood by the door. After a long time, she sighed and said, "Zijian, you are muddle-headed." Inside the room, Tsing Zijian sat by the table. His mouth was dry, but there was not a drop of water in the teapot on the table. He looked ahead with a blank expression. His mind was filled with Li Jianren's pale face. At that time, they stopped those people. Drunken ink, and I went back to the brothel to get help. I vaguely remember that someone chased after us, but I don't know why they didn't catch up. Wan Ruoqing described the situation last night. Lu Yi recorded it on the side. Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked, "Who saved us? What happened to those bad people?" Lu Yi put down his pen, smiled, and said, "We are still investigating." Wan Ruoqing thought about it and said, "Do I need to go with you to the yamen?" Lu Yi shook his head and said, "No, don't worry. I will definitely investigate this matter. However, I will have to trouble you these days. Just stay in this yard and don't go out easily." Wan Ruoqing nodded. "Ladies, I will take my leave." Lu Yi stood up, cupped his hands, and walked out the door. When he looked up, he saw the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works coming over with a group of people. Lu Yi stood where he was and asked, "I wonder why Lord Li has come here. I suspect that my son's death has something to do with the 2 women living here. I didn't expect Lord Lu to be 1 step faster." The assistant minister of the Ministry of Works stood opposite Lu Yi and said, "Those 2 women must have been escorted back to the Ministry of Justice's yamen, right?" Lu Yi shook his head and said, "I have already investigated. There is something hidden in this case, and it has nothing to do with these 2 women. I'm afraid Lord Li has suspected wrongly this time. This is a serious matter. We can't let go of anyone suspicious." The middle-aged man stared at Lu Yi and said through gritted teeth, "Lord Lu, don't bend the law for personal gain. I will not let go of a bad person, nor will I wrongly accuse a good person. As for how to solve this case, Lord Li doesn't need to worry about it." Lu Yi walked past him and said to the people guarding to the side, "Go to the Secret Intelligence Office and bring a team here to protect these 2 women. They are important witnesses and cannot be lost. If anyone tries to force their way in and take them, kill them on the spot." "Yes." Although Lu Yi was temporarily the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, he was still a member of the Secret Intelligence Office and still had the authority to mobilize the power of the Secret Intelligence Office. The people immediately nodded. "Lord, what should we do?" Someone beside the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works asked with a slightly changed expression. The middle-aged man's face was as dark as still water. He turned around and squeezed out a word from between his teeth, "Go." You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.